Let me turn this on. Welcome, everyone, to the City Council study session of Monday, July 22nd. And I think we're all live now. Our first agenda tonight is the Englewood Environmental Foundation audit process in progress. And Kimberley Huggins of Eide is here to present to provide us a brief update, along with our Director of Finances, Maria Sobota.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. Kimberley Higgins is here tonight, as the Mayor mentioned, to discuss the progress that we've made on the audit. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kimberley.
Good evening.
Hi there.
Thanks for having us to your council meeting. And I am here representing Eide Bailey, and I met with you several months ago. We have started our process, as you well know. And I am here for Doug Cash, who is our project coordinator. Doug is in Wyoming for this week. So I am very aware of what's going on and here to update you about what we've done to date. The week of June 17th, Doug and Eric Hansen were here for a week and conducted 14 different interviews. Those interviews have been completed. We have spoken with the DA's office about their report and what went on there, so we have that information and that insight. We've also reached out to former staff members of the city to no avail at this point. We have received all of the invoices that we've requested back to the beginning of the process. We are in the process as we speak of going through and reviewing those invoices. We've been very happy with the cooperation that we've received from everyone here and with the city and Eide. And at this point in time, we are in the process of reviewing all of those invoices that we have and documenting that information. We'll more than likely, in phase 2 of which we're in, be reaching out to others to interview once we've had the opportunity to go through all of those invoices en masse and determine any other questions. And we still believe that we will be able to deliver a report to you by the end of September. You have any questions on who we've talked with, anything that we may be doing, any insight that you may want me to take back to the team?
Councilmember Valentine.
I don't remember Eric Hansen being part of the team when you originally interviewed. There were 3 of you, but
Eric was one of those people who was on site with Doug from a standpoint of the interview process.
okay. And what about the other members of the team?
I don't know who was the other member. They must have been a staff person. I'm just aware of Doug and Eric being here.
When you interviewed, there was...
Oh, Audrey, when we
Yeah.
were here.
Yeah.
Yes, no, it was myself, Doug, when we were here before, it was myself, Doug Cash, and Audrey Donovan.
Okay, and then Eric Hansen came on?
Eric Hansen is part of the team that came with Doug out to the actual site to interview people.
So
Yes.
Doug Cash is the project coordinator, and then Eric Hansen is,
Is part of the team.
in what capacity?
From a standpoint of forensics and actually reviewing invoices, gathering data, talking with people, documenting the files. It will take a team effort to be able to get all of that accomplished.
Okay, and then Audrey Donovan is...
Audrey Donovan is one of our internal auditors, and because you selected a forensics team, she is not part of that team that is actually evaluating what's going on.
And since you guys interviewed together, then I just assumed that it would stay the people that interviewed with, so I didn't know that that was it. So when was that? So then the team changed, so you're on there, Doug Cash is the project coordinator, and Eric Hansen is along with him as a forensic
Yes.
auditor? All right,
That's
thank you.
right.
Go ahead.
If I may clarify as well, I think I'll just tag along to what was just said. When Eide Bailey joined us the first time, the council had not decided the direction that it specifically wanted to take, and so Audrey was there as an observer. She was never introduced as a team member for the audit.
Actually, I went back and listened to the interview, and that was the way it was presented at the time, but if you believe that it was a difference in having it be forensic, then I'll understand that, but I did go back and
That is what
Trying to
happened.
Yeah, thank you.
prepare for this piece. Thanks.
Anything further, Councilmember Valentine? No? That's what I remember too. Eric was in the portfolio that you gave us as well.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Other questions? All right, anything further you need from any of us?
You know, as
A
we're
little
going,
encouragement to some of the people that aren't responding, if we know them, or?
you do know them. At this point, it would be nice to be able to talk with people, but from a standpoint of going through the invoices and the documentation, I think what we're planning to do is go through that to see if there's anything else that we see that may come up that would warrant us really putting forth a greater effort or some pressure, which we don't want to have to happen. But if that needs to happen, we will definitely come to you and ask for that to be aware of and to reach out potentially so that we could get together with those people. This point in time, we've made an effort twice that hasn't been returned. And like I said, I think in going through the documentation, if we see anything where we need to talk to former people, city people and EAF people, we will definitely get to you and make that known if we cannot reach them.
Thank you. Appreciate your being here tonight.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for the work that you're doing.
And feel free, if you need anything else from us, you want other details, reach out and we'll provide those to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the invitation. Next up is our business licensing. This is tonight we need direction. Revenue and Tax Audit Supervisor Heather Driscoll and Finance Director Maria Sobota is still here and presenting, and hopefully we will not need as much of a presentation, but maybe a clarity of the questions we asked from the last time around. Thank you.
I'll let Heather get settled.
Thank you. Doesn't work.
No? Okay. All right. Good evening again. On June 10th, we presented to you an ordinance to move forward with business licensing, and at that time, council asked us to come back to a study session to follow up with any questions that you may have. We're hopeful that tonight we're able to address any final questions you may have regarding the path forward so that we perhaps can ask for a consensus to move forward again to bring the ordinance forward at a future regular meeting. So with that, I'll hand it over to Heather Driscoll.
As we summarize in our communication, our goal in this is not to create an economic burden or a regulatory burden on home-based businesses. And so essentially, we're here to answer any questions you might have, like Maria stated. So fire away.
Questions, council? Councilmember Berentine.
I don't want to rehash the concerns that I had before. I just didn't get them answered with this. I do think that there's a lot of additional staffing that would be required to even make this work properly, and I do think it puts an additional burden on the home-based businesses, so I don't need to repeat any of that. Just didn't get anything more here. Thanks.
Councilmember Cuesta.
Thank you, Mayor. We may very well covered this last time, and I couldn't recall. Will people be able to apply online if this were to pass?
Yes, and we actually offer that right now as well.
Secondarily, there was a line from the summary, and let me just grab the exact wording of it. The City of Englewood anticipates additional revenue will result from the recommended code change. However, incremental revenue is not the driving factor supporting the recommendation to City Council. What is that additional revenue anticipated from? I imagine there's a fee associated with the licensing. Can you tell me what that is again?
Yes, right now we have a $25 licensing fee, and our license is perpetual at this time.
Thank you. So I would imagine most of the $25 is used to cover the expenses of staff to generate the license and do the application. Is there revenue anticipated in addition to what that license fee will generate?
We do anticipate some revenue. It depends on the type of businesses that were to get licensed and what their income and taxes are. It's really no good way for us to estimate that with any sure bet because we don't know who they are.
Thank you. And that's what I was wondering. If it is now that there are businesses that then become, that the city's aware of that they weren't aware of prior, that there might be additional, I would imagine it's tax checks that could produce revenue from unpaid taxes that you guys might come across?
There's that, and then in addition to, also with filing, there is a line for use tax, and so they would encounter that line
Thank you.
and file accordingly.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Further questions? I have one, actually maybe a couple. Are there any cities in the metro area that do not license businesses?
There is nobody in the metro that does not do any type of licensing, no.
Okay.
That there's, exactly.
That's what a couple people from outside also told me, and one of them, yeah, made a bit of judgment about Englewood and a little bit how far behind we are in this, to make it more succinct for everyone and fair for everyone, more about fairness than anything else. How will you notice people, or how will this be known that there is a licensing process? What's the marketing for this, or?
So as we mentioned in here, we will reach out, where is it exactly? I believe we hit on that.
Well, in your bullet point, it says improving city communications outreach to all businesses.
Oh, my apologies. It must have been in a prior communication. So our plan is to put it on the website, make sure it goes out in the Herald, put it on social media. Also, make sure that obviously we let council know, and you can let your constituents know, really any method possible. The joke has been also a billboard if needed. Make sure you're licensed on X date and everything. And we will be, if it passes, having a 1-year amnesty period. So there will be word of mouth and everything. And ideally, if we notice somebody is operating and not, then we'll go and reach out to them and make sure.
You know, I think you did tell us this the last time, so I apologize for asking.
No, it's okay.
I do remember you saying all those
I've been here quite a few
things.
times, so, and you guys have a lot going on.
And for that, I thank you as well, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. I know that you answered the question that no cities don't require some sort of licensing. How many cities only require retail sales licenses?
I believe it is none require. I believe we are the only ones that require a strict retail only.
Okay, so all of the cities that are having all of their businesses register, are they generating significant income, like use tax income or things like that? I mean, what is the purpose that other cities are requiring all businesses to get licensed?
It is, yes, there is a revenue generation component, but it's also to know who's operating within their city. For example, Centennial only requires retail, but they have a business registration process. So every business operating has to be registered to operate within their city. And so that's their mechanism to know who is operating and conducting business there.
So if we follow Centennial's model, then we would still only collect retail sales tax and not necessarily the others?
Technically, even with how our code is, and this is where it gets kind of interesting, our code requires only retailers to be licensed, but everybody has a use tax liability, or every business has a use tax liability. And so if we were to follow that, they'll still have a use tax liability, but they technically don't have to have a sales tax license.
Thank you.
Councilmember Martinez.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just curious, you said the system already allows folks to sign up and register, right? Has anyone proactively signed up to do that? Any businesses that are not retail?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
do have a chunk of those, and 99% or 98% of our transactions and registrations go online via the MuniRev system.
Great, thank you.
So.
Anyone else that hasn't asked questions yet? Member Wink or Member Sierra? No, Councilmember Barentine.
Part of the concern that got brought up before and still hasn't been answered even with the threshold here is that if somebody is doing work for a company and then they're working out of their home, whether that means that that business then is based out of their home. on a lower threshold, say, like a council member. We work out of our home, out of our office. We would have been under this before we did the threshold. We're not making $100,000. But if you're doing a business, if you're with a business, website business or a call center business or something, and you do any amount of work at home, how are we determining those being home-based businesses then?
I would deem that that is telecommuting and not the corporate and home office of that business. Now, if you're running an entire business, you know, my example has been Grandma Pearl's mason jar lids, and you're doing your accounting, knitting the jar lids, and selling everything out of there. That's pretty much the definition of a home-based business.
Okay, so somebody who is maybe doing illustrations for a company, but most of the time they were doing it at their home, you wouldn't consider that a home-based business then?
Well, it really depends. Are they freelance and they're just selling their art to the company? It's really, you know, if we want to have this threshold on a home-based business, it's something we can look at and consider if we want to have a specific definition on what we're going to exclude for home-based businesses and what we want to deem a home-based business.
And that's why, while it's a little bit of wordsmithing for the question that both the mayor and the mayor pro tem asked, we are not the only city that doesn't require licensing for a home-based business. Sales tax license if they're doing some sales, but not a business license. So this is a whole nother layer, and there's other communities that do that, and I'd like to see those examples from that, because part of the concern then that people have brought up is that because the use tax portion of that is involved, that if the way that these audits are being conducted to do use tax, that they weren't done in the past, was that if you bought a ream of paper, you paid tax on the ream of paper in Littleton, you were not subject to tax in Englewood. But that's not how you want to look at it now. So that would mean that you would be able to go in and audit somebody's in home-based business. That would make their home subject for you to come and audit where their paper is coming from, or where they got their computer from, or where they get their phone line from, or whether they're getting their internet, and all of those things at different businesses around Englewood, they have been charged use tax for, even though a tax is already being paid on it. So there are some serious concerns of overreach with this. So until we get some definitions down and maybe a little less, you know, the way Centennial does it, I think, would be a good example, just to do that, that it's not, that there isn't any other community that does it similar to Englewood, nor do I think that we're behind the times or archaic. I think there's a difference between saying that we're behind the times and taxing people and getting money from them, or being business friendly, which is a fine line to do both. So those are some of the concerns that this additional information didn't answer that were brought up before. Thanks.
I would like to state that currently, we only have a 3% audit coverage on our licenses that are active within the city of Englewood. The intent with this is not to go in and audit home-based businesses. Neither my staff nor myself want to go to somebody's house and count pencils or reams of paper. That's really not the basis of this. The time spent on that and the revenue generated would not essentially be worth it. Yes, if we had a staff of 50 auditors, maybe that would be something that would happen at that point, but we're never going to have a staff of 50 auditors. And so the goal of this is not to go and audit home-based businesses. That's not our intention. And it's mostly, we want to just make sure that we have a list of who is operating within our city. It's quite embarrassing when another city department comes and says, hey, I need a list of who's operating within the city so I can send out a flyer, or we want to do community outreach. Can I get that? I'm like, I cannot provide that to you because we actually don't have a list like that because of how our code is structured. And so there are a lot of benefits to it, and it's not, the focus is not on going and auditing home-based businesses for some pencils and reams of paper. Yes, our code does say that the records have to be available for review. If for some reason a home-based business was to be selected for audit, those records could be provided here at the city offices. We go out to taxpayers' locations for their convenience.
A point of clarification, while you probably wouldn't want to do it, but you could with this code, while you probably, it's maybe time-consuming, you do it currently to businesses now. Ask for all that information, just like you had said. So you could do it, you may not want to do it, but this would allow you to do it. And that was the concern that I brought up. So I appreciate that clarification, that you are able with this to do it if you deemed it necessary. Whether you'd want to or not, I guess, is by a case-by-case basis, but the concern is there legitimately. Thanks.
Others, I think Councilmember Sierra is next.
I just wanted to state, so I think in the example that Member Barentine was stating, if you would look into it, I'm just curious, if a business was to buy that REMA paper from Costco, I believe they do have a sales tax exempt form, so they would present that to Costco and not pay tax there. But once they sell that, there is like a tax exempt, or there is taxes or the use tax that does apply. So restaurants or auto part, whenever you buy outside of your jurisdiction, you do have to present that form, and so you don't pay sales tax. So I'm just curious about that whole aspect of it, and just want to clarify that that's the process.
Yes. So what happens with that is if you have a resale license and you're purchasing something for resale, you can use your resale certificate to purchase that tax-free so that you're not paying tax when you purchase it and then having to also collect tax from your consumer. And so in that case, it would be something you purchase tax-free and then collect from the consumer. Now, if you're not reselling anything, for example, you do software development from home, you should be paying tax when you buy that REMA paper if you buy it from one of our businesses here in the city center. If you were to purchase it online, and let's say you buy a REMA paper or a case of paper and it's from Maria's Paper Supply that you got online, they're probably not licensed with us, and that's when a use tax would be due.
Point of clarification, I do not have a business.
I was
She
expecting you to say
secretly
that. Member Sierra, was that? It was. Okay, thank you. Councilmember Martinez.
I'm just curious about if other surrounding cities have similar gross receipts thresholds of $100,000, is that?
We would be kind of the abnormality with it, but I know I conferred with the city attorney's office, and he said that other municipalities do that. He didn't give me the names of them, and so I believe there's one in the metro. I do not recall off the top of my head who it was.
But most of them don't have a threshold?
No,
It's really
it's just
everybody? is
Everybody,
included? Okay,
all businesses operating
Got it.
is typically the standard.
okay, thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. So Councilmember Sierra's question brought up a good point. What about schools and tax-exempt organizations? Do we go after them for use tax?
No, because our code actually exempts religious, charitable, and governmental organizations when they're purchasing stuff for their actual use. So paper, pens, computers at a school would be exempt. Now, if they're going to hold a fundraiser, if it's something outside their normal course of operations, then we do expect them to because they're generating funds, but that's, very standard within the metro area. And so if there was a desire to expand that exemption, that could definitely be done. We're just simply applying the code how it is. And so-
Okay, so you're saying that you would go after a tax-exempt organization if it did something what you deemed our code would allow?
For example, there was an organization that sold alcohol at a fundraiser or at a event, and with that, expectation is since they're selling to the public, it's because they're selling to the public, and the public is not exempt. That's kind of the difference.
Okay, so in that example, so the Historic Preservation Society is a 501c3. Did they get charged sales tax when they sponsored the block party? Or is that different?
I believe they collected it from their consumers and then remitted it to us,
Okay,
which is how it should be treated because, again, the public is not exempt, but the organization is exempt. So they're collecting it. They're acting as a vendor.
okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Council, I'd like to see this come forward to a regular meeting, and we can vote on it there, but I'd like to see if we have enough to bring it forward. Others? Councilmember Martinez, let's start around.
I'm comfortable bringing it forward.
Okay. Member Cuesta.
I still need some time to consider it, but it moving to the dais is fine. And I'll
What
be
would you
decided
want
by then.
answered there? Could you submit some, whatever you think are your major questions? Or if you
Yeah,
want to be
it's-
thinking about that.
For me, it's the 100,000 threshold, and that's just some more consideration for me. As it's written now, I think I'll need to decide accordingly
Okay,
based on that.
great.
Thank you.
That's helpful. Member Wink?
I'm okay with that.
Mayor Pro Tem?
I'll pass.
Okay, no opinion from Mayor Pro Tem. Member Berentine?
I don't think this is a good idea. I don't think it's business friendly, and I don't think your embarrassment over not being able to provide marketing information for outside municipalities is justification for us going down this route. And I think it's dangerous and it's not business friendly. And quite honestly, the example that you brought up, that you wouldn't want to do certain things, but down the line, I think that the overreach is being set up to be there, and I'm very concerned about it and not happy about it.
Member Sierra?
Yes, I'd like to see it move forward.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate all the work you've done, because you've come back to us maybe 3 or 4 times now, 5 times. Yeah, it probably is true. I disagree that this is overreach. Actually, businesses want it, and I think it's a level playing field for all, and they think it's more business friendly, that everyone knows what the rules are, $25 licensing fee. So I'm looking forward to seeing this come forward at a regular meeting. I appreciate all the work you've done.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Next up is our agenda item 3, which is accessory dwelling units, and our neighborhood overlay business licensing, overlay. Why does it say business licensing information on it? Anyway, we have Planning Manager Wade Burkholder and Planner 2 John Voboril here to present and discuss this neighborhood preservation overlay and where we are with the moratorium.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. In February of this year, City Council adopted the accessory dwelling unit ordinance, and within that ordinance there was included a 6-month temporary moratorium placed on the neighborhood preservation overlay district, which is the 3200, 3300, 3400 blocks of South Grant Street and the 3200 block of South Sherman Street. The purpose of the moratorium was to engage the residents of that area of the city to discuss and explain really what the neighborhood preservation overlay meant, and in addition to what would ADUs in this neighborhood look like and feel like in terms of development. So in March, the Community Development Department held a community meeting. We invited each resident of that area via direct mail to come and talk to us. We hired a facilitator for that meeting to really engage and keep the communication flowing and try to get to what their concerns really were. A lot of the comments were regarding, what can be built, what can't be built. There was some confusion over whether or not duplexes could be included and built within the NPO with that ordinance in place. So we clarified a lot of those misunderstandings. And from that community meeting, we ended up with 3 potential solutions or answers to the moratorium that was in effect. I might back up just a minute and say that the moratorium is coming to an end in August. And so there are 3 options that City Council can consider, in our opinion. Those would be, the first one would be to allow the moratorium to expire, which would essentially mean there would be no change in the citywide ADU ordinance as it stands and was adopted in February. The second consideration would be to amend the ADU ordinance to exclude the NPO district, which would essentially mean ADUs would not be permitted within those blocks of the city that I read off, but they would still remain an option to those residents in other areas of the city that are still zoned MU R3B. So it would just exclude that section of the city. And the other option that we came up with after the community meeting was that council could have the option to amend the ADU ordinance to remove the carriage house provision from the NPO district. That would mean that only garden cottage ADU units would be permitted in this area. That was really to get at the concern of the height and the changing of the character of the neighborhood. The carriage or the garden cottage is a one-story, more typically residential-looking structure as opposed to a unit above a garage, which could add additional height, maybe taller than the existing house that's on the property already. So that was an option that we also put out there for discussion. I might add that, you know, the second and third options, whether it be to amend the ADU ordinance to exclude the NPO district or change the ordinance to remove the carriage house option, does require further public hearings back at the Planning Commission level, and then it would come to public hearings before City Council as well, because we're actually changing the ordinance. The option of allowing the moratorium to expire would not create any additional public hearing requirements or anything. The moratorium would simply just expire. And you know, just for a little bit of background information, since February, we have not issued any permits for an ADU. I dare say no one's even close to getting an ADU permit. We have had about 6 to 8 development review team meetings with interested citizens, and we've been working with a few on developing their plans. But as of right now, we have no permits anywhere within the city for an ADU at this time. So we're looking for feedback as to what City Council would like to do, how they would like to proceed with the moratorium. It is, as I said, going to expire on August 8th or 9th. So whether you want us to look at additional changes for this specific area, or if we want to let it expire, that's where we would like the feedback from you this evening.
Thank you. Councilmember Berentine, first up.
First, I'd just like a clarification if the neighborhood plan overlay is a zoning change, like a PDU would be, right?
The underlying zoning remains, but it's an overlay district with special language in it. And
Went through public hearing, went through community meetings, went through
Right.
planning and zoning, was voted on by council. It holds zoning ability. It holds law.
Correct.
It holds restrictions on what people can do in that property, similar to what a PDU could.
Correct.
Correct. So when we passed the ADUs, did anything affect any of those PDUs? Or are they their own zoning areas, just like they were originally set up?
Well,
So in order to change it for a PDU to have ADUs, you would have to go ahead and make sure that the PDU was changed.
that's correct.
Right, so I don't understand what the difference is between the neighborhood plan overlay and the zoning, because it's all the same process. So I don't even know why we had to put a moratorium on this, because after looking at it further, it is its own zoning section, just like a PDU. So I don't know why we put a moratorium on it, because it has its own regulations and laws. As a matter of fact, in order to change it, in order to allow the PDUs, you would have to go back through that process, in my opinion, looking at it. Same as you'd have to do for a PDU.
Are you talking about PUDs?
Yeah, whatever the
Okay,
alphabet
just want to make
is.
sure.
I appreciate you making the clarification, Mayor, thank you. I'm sorry I misspoke.
A PDU, a PUD, sorry.
PUD, whatever.
PUD is a specific zoning related application that sets your uses, sets your densities, and so forth. The overlay district still has the characteristics of the underlying zoning. It's just there's certain additional requirements within that area. There's subtle differences. It's not a change on the zoning map in terms of a PUD would be an actual change of the map. The overlay district doesn't change the map, it just adds a few more layers of regulation.
But I have a map. It does. I mean, it does. It's got its specific rules for 4 blocks that went through an entire process and was passed on by council, did all of the same criteria, so whether the name of it, I am not seeing where that's a difference, or whatever required a moratorium on there. I think it would be similar to the PUDs, PDUs, whatever, to go ahead and do that process would have to be actually to include it in order to change it, because it's set. We have a map, we have exactly the rules that were set, they were voted on, it has an ordinance, and so actually the moratorium was useless because it was never necessary, in my opinion, nor was it necessary for any of the other areas that already have gone through that similar process. So until I can know how it was different, I really don't understand what we would be doing, because it would then open up the others. It just doesn't make sense.
Do you have any answer to that? It's not a PUD. The overlay is an overlay. It put a restriction, actually didn't put a
Right.
restriction, it actually, well, it did put a
You have
restriction, because
several-
anything could have gone in those neighborhoods. That's why we did the overlay.
the city
Could
has
have
a-
done buildings anywhere they wanted to.
The city has a floodplain overlay. It has several other types of overlays that create special regulation for that specific area that don't necessarily have to do with the use of the property, whereas an ADU is dealing with the use, where the moratorium prohibited the city from accepting applications for that specific type of use on this property. Floodplain overlay says that if you're building a new structure in a floodplain, you have to have your house elevated a foot above the base flood elevation. So there's a minor difference there, but it's not the same thing.
Okay, Councilmember Sierra.
So for my understanding, so today they are allowed, you are, within a single-family unit, you would be able to put in an ADU.
Yes.
But if it was converted, that single-family unit can be converted into a duplex today.
That's correct.
If it was converted into a duplex today, you cannot add an ADU to that.
You're correct.
Okay. So if we were to move forward with the ADU as written, there is the possibility of keeping more of the single-family homes within that district, within those 4 blocks, potentially.
Potentially, but it doesn't take away the ability to do the duplex.
Right, exactly. They can, if a homeowner decided to put in a duplex instead of the single-family home, they're able to do that today, and
That's
would still be able to continue doing that in the future.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Others have questions? I do have one. Lost my place. Under, I don't know which slide this is. Maybe it's under the Community Matters page, let's see, page 2, 3. I guess at the bottom of it, it says it's 4. So Community Matters logo on the top of the page, number 4. It's where, the very top it says, where will visitors park? There's not enough parking now. Parking is already an issue. So the ADU, it says ADU can be taller than house potentially, since most homes are 1 story. But then there's this clarification. Is that written by you all? Clarification is ADUs can be 26 feet and primary residence can be 32 feet. Do you see where I'm?
That was a comment by Community Matters, but I will give you an example. Existing today, there's an addition going on Grant that is up at the 32-foot height, and it's addition to the house, whereas the ADU could only be 26.
That's
So-
what I thought, okay.
Yes.
And also, but then it has this, and then it says, comma, also a requirement that the ADU have a roof line similar to the primary structure. So what is that whole clarification trying to get at? It seems to me like it might be smart to say, and we always say we have design standards in Englewood, but others would say we don't have any. And one design standard could be that we say all throughout the city, all of them, their roof lines need to look similar to what the house is, that they need to blend in. Is that what that's
And
getting
that's what
at?
we're attempting to do here, is to have a design guideline that attempts to protect the neighborhood character, so you don't have flat roofs and gabled roofs and hipped roofs and all different kinds of roof lines in the area. So we're trying to say, if you have, wild example, a mansard roof, then your ADU has to have it has to match in terms of style. It doesn't have to match exactly, but we're looking for peaks and whatnot to match and resemble each other.
So that be written into your own design code or design guidelines? Is that how that's,
It's
Put into
actually
place.
included in the ADU ordinance.
it is in all
Yeah.
those pages that we read before? Okay, thank you. Councilmember Martinez?
Of the 3 existing ADUs in that neighborhood preservation overlay area, are any of them carriage house height? Or they're all the 1-story height?
They're all of the one-story height.
Okay, that's what I thought. Thank you.
Councilmember Martinez, Councilmember Valentine.
You said that the NPO didn't change the underlying zoning, but it made conditional use out of all the multi-unit structures that are there. So if they were to burn down, they can't go ahead and change things. If they were to burn down, they wouldn't be able to rebuild them. That was my understanding.
The existing density is, you're permitted to build back, your density rights are not taken away. So the density that's there on a lot today, you still have the ability to build to that density.
Plus 10%.
So the concerns at the time when they came, that was taken care of so that no properties in this 4-block area became conditional use?
No.
Okay. Would it be better than if ADUs are going to be allowed in this area, that the NPO would just be taken away then? I mean, what would be the purpose for continuing it on if no conditional uses are there, if the density still stays plus 10%, if the ADUs are going in, then what's the purpose of this one little 4-block area having its own zoning?
No new apartment buildings can replace any single or 2-family properties that are in existence today. So it precludes the building of new apartment buildings. or
Which
new
was allowed
offices.
before. Under the
Which was
previous
allowed
zoning,
before.
it was before, which
Yes.
would make the statement that it didn't change any underlying zoning incorrect, because it did. So
It
people
changed
had
some
a
of the
right
rules.
to do certain, in that zoning before, and then this neighborhood overlay took away that ability to do that, which changed the underlying zoning.
It changed some of the rules that apply to the underlying zoning.
That would,
But the underlying zoning
That's
still
zoning,
exists.
that's the zoning, it was the density before, that they could go ahead and do that on their property to build an apartment building, and now they can't, that's change in zoning. So wouldn't we be better off just taking the NPO off altogether so that we wouldn't have problems in the future about this 4-block area being in compliance with the other stuff that we do, since you believe that it's that different from a PUD?
I mean,
I-
that's an option,
Yeah.
to take take ADUs out of this area in order to do that.
To take away this NPO, then,
He's
would we go through the similar process to undo it, that it was
To
done in
undo
order
it.
to do it then? And, because I think that would be the
Yep.
fairest way to do that.
You would go through the same process to undo it, yes.
Yes. I don't know why you're asking to take the neighborhood overlay away, but that is not what I want, and I don't think any of those citizens want it either. I think what they want is to remain exactly the same.
I'm going to have to correct that you're misstating what I'm asking, is that one, I think that it was not necessarily an accurate depiction to say that this neighborhood plan overlay didn't take away underlying zoning. It did. It did make some conditional uses. I believe that some people at least believe that that's the case. It's only a 4-block area, and if it's the same protection as a PUD, which goes through a process, goes through zoning, goes through an ordinance, we vote on it, and we're willing to protect this 4-block area, then everything that happens to this should go through the same process as it did originally in the protections, which would mean we never needed to put the moratorium on it because you couldn't put ADUs there. But if we're going to take this one little section of national neighborhood overlay and act like it's that different, when it's not, the whole process is different, holds the weight of law on what they could do on their property, it changes their zoning, then we either should continue it and honor it, or we should go through the process similar so that the public has that right to do that, but just to call it different when actually nothing in the process is different at all. So I'm not saying change, take it away, but if we're going to start doing these things to it without doing a similar process, then maybe we should consider just redoing the neighborhood plan overlay in a consistent, fair, equitable, transparent manner. Did that clear it up for you, Mayor?
Absolutely. I think
Good.
that what you're trying to do is say that a neighborhood overlay is a PUD, and it is not. It's an overlay. An overlay goes over an existing zoning, which that particular group of homes and owners asked for us to take a look at when we were doing a number of different, what do we call them, small area plans back then?
Yes, the
And
small
that
area
was
plans.
one of them that we had many meetings over, and that was the best way to handle it. At the time, we were told by several council members they were sure we were going to get sued for down zoning, and which is really functionally what it did. And I think, Member Barentine, what you're struggling with is that we rezoned, we did not rezone, we overlaid, but it's functionally a change. And at this point,
But I
unless
think,
something
for
more
a
could be
point of
done.
clarification, I think he just clarified again, it was a rezoning. You could go ahead on those lots and build apartments, and now you can't. That's a rezoning. You changed the zoning of those properties. So to keep calling a duck a pig is not helping here. It has the same effect as the PUD, and if we're going to make changes, then I just am wanting to do it in the same process so that everybody in that area is honored the same way that they were honored when they created this 4-block area.
Yeah, so I think, sure, you can have it that way, but it's not necessarily the way everyone else sees it. So let's go on. Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, and I think this is a little bit confusing, because I do believe a lot of people in that district assumed that they were protected from some things that happened there. So I do agree with Councilmember Barentine. I believe that we should, if they want ADUs in that area, then they should, whoever wants ADUs should have to go through the same appeal process that the original people did to set that overlay. I think they went through a lot of work, and so changing what goes on there, I believe, also should take that same amount of work.
Councilmember Martinez.
Thank you. Do we also have the option to extend the moratorium for another X amount of months?
No.
No. It just expires in August? Okay. And so a couple of these options require the public hearing process from the planning and zoning and then probably council. So
Right.
we're basically on a hard deadline right now to
Right.
decide. Okay.
And if you do choose to do something that, changes the ordinance, at this point in time, it will be several months after the moratorium is expiring. Just keep that in mind as well, because it will take time to hold public hearings and whatnot.
Council, I was at the forum, I know 3 of us were there, and I've talked to several people since then, some homeowners that live in them, and some renters, and some people who own and have renters in them. And it's, the thing that I hear over and over again for the neighborhood overlay, which is why we did what we did back in 2000 and, was it 10, 12? Yeah, it seemed like it probably started in 10 and ended in 12, right? Was to keep it as stable as we could. And that someone misunderstood that duplexes were allowed does not make it so. Unfortunately, that was actually huge coming down from multifamily to fourplexes to triplexes. I think you remember all that, those of you that were involved. But duplexes was sort of the limit, and everyone thought that was really bringing it down tight. I think it's worked out fine to some extent because we didn't get apartments, but at the same time, people don't want a duplex. If you don't want duplexes, I think ADUs is one way to more stabilize the area. I doubt that people will put them in. I think it's pretty expensive, and one homeowner told me that they didn't want us to mess with their right to actually sell their place to someone who wants to build a duplex, and that was taking her land rights away and her future and her retirement. So it's really a mixed bag. I think we've got a balance that maybe people are going to be unhappy on both sides, which maybe is the right balance. I'd like to see us bring this forward to a regular meeting, or I guess it would be, if we didn't bring it forward, it would just simply pass, right?
The moratorium would
Yeah.
expire and the regulations would go into effect.
Yeah.
in
That would be my recommendation at this point, and then handle it as it comes after that if we need to.
Can I get a clarification on your question that you said that the moratorium cannot be extended? Why is that?
They have to defer to the city attorney.
A moratorium for planning and zoning is different than a moratorium for any other area of the code because of the way the code is written. In order to make changes to the code itself, you have to start with the Planning and Zoning Commission, and that's as established with the code. The moratorium was something that this council decided to amend the original ADU and put the moratorium on. So when that ordinance went through, it went through with this moratorium as part of that ordinance. In order to change the code, which is what you would be doing, you have to go back to planning and zoning.
Which one? To change the overlay, which is an ordinance and went through zoning and did all of that, or the ADU one?
Neither. What we're discussing here is moratoriums. So.
But you said a moratorium is different when it's planning and zoning?
Right.
And they just got done saying that this national neighborhood overlay is not a zoning issue. That's what the mayor said, is that it's not zoning, it's something different. And that's what I was arguing, is that it is zoning and should go through the process. So I'm not sure which it is.
She's talking about the moratorium, Councilmember Barentine.
And
all.
the difference in the moratorium that she has made has been whether it is regarding, a moratorium regarding a planning and zoning issue.
It is. ADUs
And
are a
it-
planning and zoning issue.
And for the neighborhood overlay, we were told it wasn't a zoning issue, so then it should have never, I don't, that's what I wanted the clarification for. I appreciate your,
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem.
is the attorney going to be able to answer that for me, please? Thank you.
Go ahead, is there more?
Oh, it's the clarification I was asking was from her.
So I've already spoken about moratoriums, and this moratorium was created per the ordinance that was passed on ADUs. ADUs was a change to the zoning code. So in order to make any change to the ADU law that was passed, the ordinance that was passed, you have to go back to the Planning and Zoning Commission. If you want to do a change to a neighborhood overlay, you have to go back to planning and zoning. Anytime you change the planning and zoning code, you have to go back and start with the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Thank you.
And I appreciate that. So the clarification she just made is anytime you want to make a change to the zoning change, including the neighborhood overlay, we would have to go back to planning and zoning. So it's this process that I have a concern with, not whether we keep the neighborhood overlay or not, but that we're bastardizing a process here because it's convenient. We created this 4-block area, and now it's still in this zoning vibe, that if we change this and allow ADUs into the zoning area, that we would have to go through a different process. And that's what I have a problem with.
I think we just probably disagree on how you interpret it. So, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. So if we just let the moratorium expire, ADUs will be allowed in the neighborhood preservation overlay.
That's correct.
Okay, so then I have another question. I have talked to someone who went and picked up paperwork to build an ADU and started the process and got stuff in, and then the city said, well, you don't have everything. There was a part missing in the paperwork that the city needed to let them know. I don't know what it was, but is that part of the reason that we haven't had people come forward to build ADUs?
So the process we have in place is that anyone wishing to construct an ADU, they start at the development review team level. So all of the departments have eyes on the application, and oftentimes there are things that are missing that's required per code, and it's up to the applicant to provide that information before we move forward. The second part of the process is that they actually have to have a property maintenance inspection and have all of those issues corrected and fixed before we will take the process forward. So the people we've talked to either have had incomplete applications or they're waiting on getting their property maintenance issues corrected. So it's possible that they've not gotten the stuff back into us, and we haven't caught up with the process as we have outlined per the code.
My understanding was that there were parts missing in the checklist of things that needed to be done when they took it back in, but I could be wrong. I'll check more on that. So,
Okay.
thank you.
Councilmember Sierra.
Do we happen to know how many people have asked for an ADU but fall outside of the actual designated zones?
We have not had anybody come in out, well, no, that's.
I've heard at least of a couple people that have
had
requested.
people- Yes, you're right. We have had maybe 4 to 6
Okay.
that have had interest but fell outside of the zoning
Okay.
that permits it.
And then also, just regarding my stance, I do believe that we need to move forward with just allowing the moratorium to expire. There's a couple of things that we do need to look at, though, because obviously, just based on the feedback, parking is a concern, so that's maybe something that we should look into. And then also just the short-term rental aspect of the ADU. I'm still concerned about about allowing ADUs to become short-term rentals. So that's obviously something that council will have to discuss, but at this point, I'm against that aspect of it, just because I do see ADUs at some point being an affordable housing aspect. I think just with the current construction rates and everything that's going on in terms of building in the city, it may not be price advantageous at this point, but I think maybe in the future it probably would be. So I think just economic factors are playing into some of that aspect right now.
Councilmember Martinez.
At this point, I would be comfortable letting the moratorium expire. Obviously, if we want to make a change to the neighborhood preservation overlay, we would need more conversations at the council level, more study sessions before asking planning and zoning to do anything further.
Thank you. Councilmember Berentine.
I'm not comfortable in moving it forward because I do believe that it's a change to a zoning that was already adopted by ordinance, and I think it needs to go through its proper process. I do need a clarification. Councilmember Sierra said, aside from the other areas that are exempted, I mean, originally we were told there were 80 people, 50 people, something that were interested in doing this. It is kind of surprising that nobody's come forward. But what other areas aside from the PDUs are exempted from ADUs.
The R1A district,
And
Pardon?
R1A and R1B are not allowed.
Which areas, aside from this neighborhood plan overlay and the PDUs, are not allowed?
ADUs are not allowed in the R1A district,
Okay,
in the R2,
R1B.
R1B.
so those are the only ones. This neighborhood plan overlay currently not in the PDUs, and then those two.
Those two.
Okay. All right, and like I said, I think the NPO has the same process and procedure, and we should, that allowing ADUs would be a change to that as it would be to any PDU, and that it should go through the same process.
Councilmember Sierra.
I was just going to remark, so what I've heard from a few people are not necessarily, well, actually, it has to do with small lots. And then the second aspect, which I think is the biggest aspect of people not being allowed to build AUs, is just the investor, that one clause that we said about investors, and I think it affects the trust, family trust, and so they're not able to build, even though they're not necessarily corporations or investors, it's just that it has prevented them from actually applying for ADUs.
Final question I have for you. And that person does not live in the NPO either. I do have a question, or maybe there's two. Maybe there's two. The same person's been talking to me. Maybe you have someone else. I did want to ask, and maybe this is a silly question, but all of our zones were created by ordinance, right?
Yes.
Thank you. So every zone, R1A, R1B, industrial, all of those are created by ordinance. So ADUs, if we adopted them, are allowable because we have a process that allows for them. It's not illegal to do ADUs even though zones were created and passed by the same process. I mean, this is illegal, what we're doing is what maybe I should be asking the city attorney. Because what's been presented tonight is that the neighborhood overlay became a new zone, therefore we can't put an ADU in it because it went through a process.
So you adopted an ADU ordinance that it did include the MPO, but then what you did is simply put a timeout
Right.
on it for 6 months.
Right, I'm making another I'm trying to help explain this for anyone who might be confused that might be here or watching.
Okay.
All of our zones were passed by ordinance,
Correct.
right?
Yes.
So to say that one particular area can't allow ADUs because it was an ordinance change, zoning change, would be inaccurate because then we'd have to say that for all of them. All of them are passed by ordinance.
Right.
Okay, thank you, that's all I wanted. I'm ready to let this go as well. Councilmember Wink, you want to weigh in?
Thank you, gentlemen, for sharing this information with us yet again, and for being here for questions this evening. I too, I went back and forth on a couple of the options as I was reading the packet in the last couple of days. I think when you think of the long and the short term of the city, and I think I'm certainly ready to move on, and my best opinion right now is also to let the moratorium go and move on as is. They can have single-family homes, they can have duplexes with their height limits.
Correct.
And we go.
Member Costa, do you want to see this?
You bet. Thank you, Mayor. I would go with the amend ADU ordinance to exclude the NPO district. I didn't support ADUs in any district, so I would maintain that. That's within the city. I wonder now that we've received 6 applications, if we're governing for a handful of people. We spent years on that, going back and forth on it. Hopefully that picks up. I know there's plenty more time in the future for it too. And I do actually share the concern of Councilmember Sierra that these are now being proposed as short-term rentals as well, which I think is a whole nother variable that could prove there could be a lot of unintended consequences, I think, in the neighborhoods. Thank you.
Member Martinez, you already weighed in, you wanted to, and Member Sierra, you wanted to, the moratorium to just be let, and Councilmember Barentine, no. Okay, I think Do we have to bring that? We don't, I mean, we don't. It's just tonight. We're just letting it expire. Councilmember Martinez.
Yeah, that was gonna be my question. If we just, if the majority of us want to expire, there's no further action we need to take, correct?
That's correct.
Right. However, we will have short-term rentals back here, and that will be a key piece of it that I think probably most of us are very nervous about ADUs being used for short-term rentals, so. Mayor Pro Tem.
Just a point of information or clarification. If every zone was passed by ordinance, are you suggesting that we should allow ADUs in R1A and R1B?
No, I'm just showing that the logic of the conversation does not quite compute.
Okay, well, that's
I just wanted to make-
logic here also, and so that's why I wanted
No,
point
we
of
excluded
clarification on that.
those, which we did that night. So, and that was part of the planning and zoning's recommendation to us, so. All right. Let's take a break, and we'll be back.
Mayor, I do
at-
want to have one clarification. We may have a disagreement on how this process is, but the ADUs are not allowed in PDUs. This is a zoning change for the neighborhood overlay. I don't have skin in the game one way or the other for the neighborhood overlay, but if there's going to be a change to it, I think it should go through the proper process. You may look at it different, but to just summarily dismiss it as if it's confused or that I'm confused, I think is a bit disrespectful for the time and energy that I've put in, and I think I've given some good reasons for this, and they've been backed up by our staff. So I would appreciate, while we may disagree, for you not to put it in terms as if I am confused or that it's incorrect either. Thanks.
I think, it's not that you're confused or anyone else, it's that we have a difference in how we view ordinances, and the NPO is like an ordinance of R1A, and both of them are subject to ADU decisions. One was excluded, the other one had a moratorium, and the moratorium is going to now expire. Thank you. Let's take a break. We'll be back in at 7:15. We're on time. Oh, no, we're ahead, 15 minutes.
Right down the road, I know where to go, I mean, I've got lost, it's been good.
We're on to agenda item 5 and the stormwater drainage alternatives and funding recommendations, information and direction tonight. Finance Director Maria Sobota and Public Works Director Maria DeAndre are here with other experts to present and discuss this stormwater drainage alternatives and funding.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. I'm actually going to ask Maria to start the conversation tonight, but I did want to introduce David Bell from our financial advisor, Stifel. He's joined us tonight to answer specific questions that I'm not able to regarding the financial scenarios we put into the memo.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Maria. So just a recap of where we were at the last meeting, the direction provided by council was to look at project S1 and possibly S2, depending on the cost and the amount of the rate analysis. And so if you recall, staff had laid out 3 options, options A, B, and C, and I just wanted to mention how that relates to where we are tonight. So at that time, staff was working under the premise that all we had to work with was that $3 million if we did some sort of a loan. So that was what the recommendation was based on. So if you recall, we talked about flood proofing at about $500,000 and then starting on S3 because of the potential, just the relative cost. We knew that Oxford would be significantly higher, and we knew that S2 would be significantly higher, and that we couldn't do enough with that $3 million to really get us anywhere with those 2 projects, so we jumped to S3. So that's how those 2 relate. So at the direction based from council that evening was to proceed again with S1 as quickly as possible and also look at S2 as well. And so the recommendation before you tonight is that we're not recommending flood proofing at this time. So we did talk about possibly acquisition of homes. The council weighed in on the flood proofing of homes, but we're saying given the dollar amounts that we're talking about and focusing our efforts on S1 and S2, we're just saying let's put aside flood proofing unless City Council wishes to go there with additional funds. So hopefully that helps to explain that. Also, as Maria talks about here, again, just to reemphasize that the dollar amounts that we're talking about only cover S1 and S2. So anything related to maintenance is above that. Anything related to administrative costs is above that, such as the flood proofing, as well as any of the additional projects. So just keep that in mind. And so also in relation to this, we're talking about the stormwater program. We also know that we have issues in both the sanitary sewer and potentially the water enterprise funds as well, that we just don't have enough built up in terms to take care in a proactive way, start addressing the infrastructure needs in those 2 areas. We are undertaking, I believe the RFP went out on Friday, a condition assessment for all 3 areas, stormwater, sanitary sewer, and water. And we're doing that to, again, look at the system, see what the needs are out there so that we can come back and address that with council. But I did want to throw that out there that even though there might be a hefty balance in the water fund, it might not necessarily take care of all the needs that are out there. So with that, our recommendation tonight is really to look at or get feedback from City Council on pursuing Project S1.
Director
Which is-
DeAndre, we have one light on.
Sure.
Are you willing to take a question? at this
Absolutely.
point? Okay, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. So I'm a little bit troubled by the process and the way this went, because staff comes forward with some recommendations, and it was obvious that flood proofing was the direction that staff wanted to go. 5 council members wanted to move forward with flood proofing. Now, I'm not saying that I think we should do flood proofing, but I also, Mayor, thought that we wanted to look at more options because we ran out of time. We stopped early, and now we're moving a totally different direction, is what I'm thinking.
Certainly. So I think, I'll let Maria speak to this too. I think what we heard the direction is proceed with the projects as quickly as possible. So that's our focus tonight. If there is a desire to do something with flood proofing, that would come from the city council, but that would be in addition to the dollars that we're talking about here, just to be clear on that. And knowing that there's a significant amount of administrative work associated with that. So again, I alluded to it, I believe, a few weeks ago, but you know, who gets flood proofing? We would have to set those parameters. How do they get reimbursed? All of that stuff. So there is administrative costs related to that too. So I'll just leave it there.
Mayor Pro Tem and I both during the mayor-manager meeting wanted more than just S1 and S2 to come up tonight, because we did feel as though we ran out of, I thought anyway, and I said this at the regular meeting, that we had pushed those so we could get going on those really quickly. Those seemed pretty clear, but that then the other, I think what might have happened, and I called the city manager this afternoon because I was trying to figure this out on how this happened, and that perhaps it wasn't communicated clearly from our end, but I did worry that maybe when we were looking at option A, B, and C, we jumped into S1, S2, and then forgot that you'd actually given us these packages of option A, B, and C, and that we never really walked through those.
Sure.
But we did push it forward for S1 and S2, so I still would like to talk about some of the other options. And I know, we all know, we don't have the money.
Yeah.
We got to figure out how to get the money if we do decide we want to do some of that. So is that what you understood too?
Yes, that's what I understood too. But I also, earlier this week, I went back and re-listened to the July 8th study session. And I am really wondering if this council may have decided, because of the urgency of the hour, that perhaps we're maybe doing overkill, going to a 25-year flood issue rather than doing a 10, because currently we're only set up for a 2-year flood, is that correct? And a lot of the pipes are clogged, and so it's very possible that we could go with a 10-year pipe, and then we may end up having more money. I'm just thinking that we should perhaps rethink this and maybe look at the engineering report.
Yeah, we talked about the options.
Councilmember Sierra also, but do you want to respond to that, and then he's next?
Okay.
Go ahead, respond.
So, yes, so we talked about, I believe the direction was to look at the 25. So if I can paraphrase, as long as we're doing it, let's look at the 25-year level of protection. So those were the options laid out with, in Caliber's report. A 10-year storm event happens on proportion every 10 years, whereas a 25-year storm event happens once every 25 years. And obviously, it's a greater level of rainfall at that point. So I think it's a matter of direction from council. The direction I heard was going with the 25, but that is certainly, you know, it's you wouldn't provide as much volume or, capacity with the 10-year storm event as you would with the 25-year storm event pipes.
Right, and that's actually what I heard council say too about the 25-year, but I also heard Mr. Murphy say last week that it was not just a 25-year flood doesn't necessarily happen every 25 years. It could happen every year. So my question is, how many 10-year events have we had since July 24th last year? I mean, it has poured several times.
I'll have to check on that. We can check with urban drainage on that to get the exact, they publish or have data like that we can ask them for that and get their input on that.
Thank you.
Councilmember Sierra.
No, I was going to just follow up on Mayor Pro Tem's comment because, yeah, I think we did decide on the 25-year, at least with the S1 pipe. I was more comfortable with the 25-year just because there were certain segments of pipe there that were already 25, and if we went down to a 10-year, I was concerned that we were going to have that same issue of potential sinkholes. Obviously, I'm not an engineer, so I can't say for sure, but I just wanted to not have that type of issue where you do have a smaller pipe going into a bigger pipe, into a smaller pipe, or that type of thing. I believe later on, Councilmember Cuesta did say the same thing about, or at least the 25-year pipe for S2. And obviously, we do need to have discussions about it because now that you're looking at the price tag and what the quarterly spend is going to be for each resident, I think we do need to get some guidance from just the experts on what it means if we went to a 10-year pipe versus a 25-year.
So I don't know if anyone else wants to, do you want, it seems to me like we're going to want to look at both.
Yeah.
And you started at the big one, which is
Yep.
what we said.
Mhm.
And I think all of us want the very best. And I think if anything, we realized since 1999 and maybe before, and even in the putting in corrugated pipe, that we haven't always gone for the best, or maybe the biggest, and we need your help in determining when is appropriate, when isn't. I don't want to second change us again. We have a future that we want many people to live here and do well. So I'd like to see us do the right thing, and if it's 25-year, I mean, I have no doubt that climate change will continue, and yet we can't predict exactly how it will look for this area. Whether it's going to be drier or more wet, there are still different ways in which that could appear. But so far, we're seeing major storm events that we haven't seen quite like this. So I want to be ready for whatever our grandchildren, or I probably won't have any, but Dave's grandchildren will have. Councilwoman Martinez, I hope my kids are watching.
I was going to say the same thing. When we spoke last time, I would prefer to go with the 25. I'm happy to look at both, just because, you know, I want to do what's right, and I don't want the councils in the recent future to also have to be having this discussion again. So if we're going to do this and put this infrastructure in, it makes sense to me to build it longer term, and we know that the storms keep coming and they're more severe and the duration is a bit longer around the whole country. So I think it just makes sense to do it, at least plan for the 25-year pipes.
Member Cuesta.
Thank you. I can't recall, Mr. Murphy told us what cities are typically built to when they're being built new. What is the piping typically at?
Typically, like in newer developing cities, they'll plan for detention, and so they'll hold back the water at the 100-year level and release it typically at a 25-year pipe.
Gotcha.
Tends to be, and it can vary somewhat on the design, but I would say that tends to be the norm.
Understood. And I really, really like the idea of 25 years because we're all off of council a decade or two from now and there's some horrible rain and we have 10-year pipes and it's a 25-year flood and we all might say, well, shoot. And I think that this is the kind of large decision that I think will, I wouldn't say haunt me, but will stick with me for a long time, depending upon how it goes. Having said that, I do also see that just to fix these two segments at the 25-year level, I think it was $59 a quarter is what we were looking at was the estimate. And I know that's $20 per household, and that's significant. And so I realize it's easy for me to say that 25 years sounds great, but that there's certainly a lot of economic considerations too for the folks in the neighborhood. So I'm sure we're all weighing that in our head as well. And that's the tricky part for me is that the $60, it's a lot. And I think seeing the 10 years, as everybody has suggested, would be valuable for me as well. Thank you.
So I think that's what we'll come back to on August 5th with we'll be bringing a change order with Caliber to look at a little bit more detail between the 10 and 25, talk a little bit about what does detention do for us, because that was a factor too, as well as talk a little bit, just get a little bit more in depth.
Member Barentine.
You said that the pipes, in answer to Mayor Pro Tem's question, and just to clarify again, are currently done to the 2-year?
It varies throughout the city. So, but generally, it's a 2 to 5 year throughout the city, but it can certainly vary from location to location.
So going to 10 would be, to her point, on maybe kind of doing some overkill, going to a 10 would be either 5 times more the capacity or at least double the capacity currently on there. So that would be something I think that would be worthwhile to look at. I don't know if that might be necessary. Part of the problem that I understand with the sinkhole was that there were some bigger pipes and smaller pipes going in, and apparently we didn't do a very good fix on the last 3 that we did, but that they keep failing at the place where they had been corrected before, is that it's failing at where it wasn't corrected, and so that's more the problem maybe even necessarily than what the size of the pipe was. And I missed it in Caliber's, where in Caliber's report, from what the mayor stated, is this a result of climate change, that the sinkholes were the result of any climate change issue? Could you point that out in the report?
I don't think we talked about that.
okay.
I think there's various theories out there, but it does appear across the nation that we're experiencing heavier rain events and.
But that wasn't the result of the sinkholes,
No.
wasn't that?
No.
And if we put a pipe in from a 2-year pipe or a 5-year pipe to a 10-year pipe, we would still be doubling or, quadrupling whatever the capacity of that pipe that would handle what's been going on currently for the areas that are flooding.
Maybe not, I don't know if it's, like quadrupling the size. I think it's the amount of rainfall then that you can handle. I don't know that it's, so we're handling a larger storm event, but it's not necessarily 4 times, let's say, or 5 times the size of the pipe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then we would have to make sure that we're all defining it the same way, because
Correct.
if you say a 2-year flood or 2-year event and somebody says 10-year or somebody says 25, then I think we need to agree on the terminology so that we know what we're buying into. 25-year sounds awesome, but if it's really not that, if we're not talking apples to apples here, that a 10 and a 25-year pipe are that much significantly bigger
Sure.
as a 2 to a 10 would be, then we need to make sure that we're defining that. Otherwise, we're not really getting the bang for our buck and we're just using words to make ourselves look good. That wouldn't be good. So if a 2 to a 10 really isn't 2 times 5, then, and giving us that much more capacity, then we really need to understand that, and I would like that additional information. Thank you.
Yeah, we can clarify that.
Thank you. Councilmember Cuesta.
It's something that came up at the last meeting, and I was hoping we could get further clarification. I believe it's related, not dead on, is that it sounded like there was a buildup of sediment in the existing pipes. Is that something that's included in the $3 million proposed here, the cleaning that out?
Yeah, that was, that was part of my option A, that would be one of our immediate efforts, hopefully even this fall, to go in there and remove all that sediment from the Oxford pipe.
Do we need a third party to do that, or would that be Englewood staff?
We would have to contract that out.
This is mine. I think that's one, regardless of where we go on these pipes. We got to get that sediment cleaned out, is one thought of mine. Thank
So
you.
you're thinking pulling that particular project out of that, like, $3 million thing?
I would hate for that to stall
Yeah.
in other conversations. That seems to me like a relatively quick remedy that at least gives some relief to the current system. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think thank you. I think when we were talking about it last week and when I brought it up at regular meeting last week that I wanted to see more on this, I think it was looking for more, the S1 and S2 is going to take, even though we're going to move on it quick, it's going to take a long time to get it done. But are there other things in option A, B, or C that are quick wins that help in the long term as well, short term and long term? And wondering if the cleaning of the pipe is one of those, then let's move that forward too. And if there are any others like that, I don't know what they are, and which ones you would suggest would be another one. And I know money is an issue, but let's put that aside for a minute and say, what else can we do sooner than later? And then let's figure out what are the funding options for it.
Certainly.
But I'm not trying to act like the funding isn't an issue. We know it is. Go ahead.
If I may, and I'm going to jump ahead, so, tell me to be quiet if it's going to create an issue. I think the packet in front of you, talking about the possibility of bonding, the loan from the later fund could be paid back from that bonding. So when you say money is not, we could, use that money for maintenance or something like that as a loan. But if we put it as part of a package, we would also be financing the maintenance and the improvements and the designs with longer-term money.
That's correct.
That's correct. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. One of the reasons I wanted to perhaps visit the 10-year pipe instead is because I do believe there's probably some pretty significant failures higher up in the line, also close to Bannock. I partly know that a
Point
couple
of
weeks ago.
information, Mayor Pro Tem, are you
Mhm.
discussing the Oxford Avenue outlet pipe?
Well,
Which
not
pipe?
down at the bottom, but higher up. That same, it drains into the Oxford outlet pipe.
So more further east? Further
Yes.
west, I mean, sorry.
No, further east.
Okay, thanks.
So
Closer to
still on
Bannock.
the Oxford, or are you talking about other areas that feed into it?
It-
Because it goes
Well,
for quite a
it
while.
feeds, it feeds into Oxford. It's just up above Rotolo Park, that area up there, by Bannock and
Yeah, part of
Acoma.
S2 then.
Right, part of S2. And so, I mean, I know that there was someone from Public Works sitting out there a couple weeks ago on Monday night when it had rained so hard. The street out there at the corner of Bannock and Tufts had raised up significantly. And I think Public Works came by after this was the 2018 flood, came by and fixed that. But I really believe that the person sitting out there was expecting that could happen again. So I think there are some huge issues. Also, I know that the pipe or the drain in the center of the alley between Bannock and Acoma actually drains back to Acoma, which is problematic because it's putting water back in the floodplain instead where the water's coming from. It shouldn't have done that.
Sure.
So,
I'm sorry, S3, I'm sorry, the corner of
S3, okay.
Bannock and Tufts is part of S3. And yes, it was a utilities employee who was sitting out there that evening and saw the asphalt rise. So I think that's, yeah, what's going on underneath there. Again, I think the pipes are surcharged where they're just trying to carry too much water. And so it's probably coming up through the asphalt in some way.
okay.
Is what you're experiencing or seeing out there.
All right, so just so we can figure out how to address that problem, if S1 and S2 is going to take care of that problem, but I'm not sure it is.
Member Wink, did you want to say something or no? Otherwise,
I do and I don't, and I do
Okay.
and I don't.
So anyway, I
I
can
mean,
come back.
none of my opinions differ from, I think it was the July 8th meeting where we last spoke about this and looked at that really well orchestrated or organized slide deck. I feel as if there are gaps in our conversation from that meeting to tonight, and so we're going over things that we've already discussed. The mayor discussed funding to support a certain segment of the population that might not be able to manage if the fees increase. I mean, we're just going over things, so nothing really has changed from that point. I look forward to what you suggested, Director DeAndre, about maybe digging a little bit deeper into some of the details that we talked about in the three options. For example, what the detention might mean for us, how better we can understand certain of the features from the three columns. I mean, there's so much on this lovely slide deck, but just how we can drill down to make that final decision. And I guess I will restate one thing. It just, between the three option columns, I mean, you did a really great job of laying things out and mixing and matching, and I think it's pretty clear, if we were looking at it again, what each option provides to us. So I just have nothing beyond that to add.
And I would say too, this may have come up last time, but we can certainly mix and match. So, you know, if there was a desire to do the Oxford line, again, thinking of the drain of the funnel, you know, if that's Oxford where everything kind of drains to for that south central area, maybe it does make sense to do Oxford as a 25, and then you could think about doing 10 through the neighborhoods. Just another option to throw out.
Councilmember Berentine.
The problem that I think Mayor Pro Tem is bringing up is that the funnel would be reversed. That what we would be doing is farther down the line is opening it up to a bigger pipes with smaller coming in there. That the concern about S3 not being done is that if S3 collapses, the water has no way to get to the bigger pipes. And we have seen some significant problems going on in that area. Is the Rotolo Park and that cul-de-sac of Jason S3 or S2?
S2.
Okay, so when we see, as the news pointed out, the plethora of small sinkholes that are all over the city. And I went over there to check, like Jason and those guys were like, this gets redone. That sinkhole's there constantly. That's been cut and redone and filled in constantly. And so if that fails, then the water's got no way to get to the bigger pipe that we're doing. So I want to make sure that the system coming down into that we don't fix it down here and then have a collapsing system here, which looks like is happening as people are getting more and more nervous about every time they see something that they sticks in and it doesn't make a sound, and we're putting it on next door that they've got holes going on in alleys that was in the 4300 block. We've got the one on Jason, we've got the other one that got put on to next door where people are getting a little nervous with these. So if we could get a little bit better idea of how S3 is running into the S2 so that we're not just, like I said, doing a reverse funnel where we have a lot of outlay, but if the way that it gets to these pipes collapses, then it won't matter whether we have a 25 or a 10 or a 5-year pipe, because there won't be any water in it. It'll be flooded up there. So if we could have just that little bit more information. I think the Mayor Pro Tem brought up a wonderful question. Thank you.
Member Cuesta.
I've been toggling back and forth between the 7-8 packet and then tonight's packet, and I'm on tonight's packet, and I am on page 10 of 29, and it's the project cost estimates, and it just has the different paths of the segments. Yes, it's color coded. Jeez, there's probably a dozen different colors there. Okay, so S1 is, it starts at the, I guess that would be the westernmost part of the map, and then continues to just under Santa Fe. S2.
That helps.
That does, thank you. So when we do look at costs then, if we were to say, and perhaps where Steve could, if we were to do 25 foot at the S1, and then we went to 10 feet at S2 and 10 feet in some of the feeders that are most impacting neighborhoods that we're seeing. 10 to 10, did I say what? What did I say? 10, 15? Yeah, 10 years. What might be the financial difference? Would one help to pay more for the other in some significant way, or do we know what the trade-off would be?
I think if you were, again, as kind of that downstream pipe, you would want to look at the 25-year for Oxford. But I think from an equity standpoint, if we're doing, I think we would want to go with either the 10-year or the 25-year in the neighborhoods and not necessarily do 25 for S4 and 10 for S2. I think you would want to be consistent with that.
Okay.
So, because again, let's say we did, for S3, if we did a 25, we would want to make sure we have the capacity down. The Greenway can handle it, but then once it hits Rotolo Park, can that handle the 25-year coming from the S3? We would want to make sure that if it's 25 at S3, we have 25 at S2 as well.
And right now at Rotolo, as it goes out, it's at what number of years?
I don't know
What
off the
pipe
top of
size?
my head.
5, do you think, or?
Potentially, yeah,
Okay.
most likely.
Okay, great, thank you. Mayor Pro Tem. And Member Cuesta, is yours on again, or no? Okay.
Thank you. And I was just going to say, my husband and I went down by Rotolo Park a couple weeks ago, and that Rotolo Park fills up really fast. So if we don't have something that's draining it faster down line, we do have to be careful about how much more water we put into Rotolo Park.
Member Barentine.
So where the sinkhole is on the cul-de-sac from Jason, where the pipe comes from Rotolo Park and empties in to go to the rest of the system, we don't know what size pipe that is?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Okay, because that was the one where that was where the press was about the sinkhole that got patched up again, where they said that it's been done numerous times. Could we get some information on that, as I requested before? But now I'm more concerned about it because, like I said, if that pipe at Jason in that cul-de-sac fails if that sinkhole happens again and that pipe fails, everything floods up. So, and I appreciate your explanation for how all the drainage system is from Acoma to Broadway coming down there into that to fill up, but that's where we're having the problem with actually 2-year events. So that's what brought up the concern, because there's other people in that Jason Park area that are seeing these kind of failures underneath the street. The asphalt coming up at Tufts like that is not where the water's supposed to be running. So there's other problems in that S3 area that are of a huge concern. So if we could get a status update on what's going on with that, because it flooded with a normal 2-year thing over there.
And just to clarify, so that's at the end of the cul-de-sac on Radcliffe? On the west end of Radcliffe?
Jason.
At Jason Park? Okay.
There's a cul-de-sac at the end of Rotola Park where that pipe comes under there, and it's been cut and redone so many times that, and you've got a lot of people that park on there, but none of the neighbors would park on there because they said they've seen that come and be repaired with truckfuls of stuff being put in there, and if it's washing away, if it's eroding that quickly, that the year before it was cut and it was done, and if it's doing that, then we're going to have a failure at that. And then one other quick question on Oxford. Now that we've done all the way up to the road, are we confident that Santa Fe, the pipe under Santa Fe, is not going to fail?
Yes. So I included in the packet tonight more of a schematic that shows the exact location of the breaks, and you can see that all of them are located at either transition points from the 78 to the 92, and we also listed the material type. So looking at record drawings, we were able to confirm that the pipe under Santa Fe is either steel or reinforced concrete, and it's a straight line, 78-inch. Yep.
Is that a 10, a 2, a 5, a 25-year pipe?
I'd have to look. I believe everything that was 78-inch was in that less than 10-year storm event. But I'd have to verify that. But we feel comfortable about the material underneath 85. It's where those angle points are, where we've had the breaks, and with the CMP, the corrugated metal pipe.
Okay. And so right now, but there's a correlation to the size of pipe and the 2, 5, 10, and 25-year. But, okay. Where were there change points over from these 3? Because it looked like a straight line from where we had it on the map. Do you mean change points like from where it was repaired before?
No, more like where there's a bend in the line.
Oh.
Those, and so that tends to be a weak point, and so that's where the previous repairs have occurred. So there were
The way it's drawn on here is that it's a pretty straight line, so that's why I was asking, but
okay.
Whatever. Could you get us the size of the pipes compared to what it is for the 2 and 5 and 10 and 25? And then if it is more of a funnel, like the way that it's normally a funnel, whether we're actually spending a lot more money and it really doesn't handle that much more water, because we're making an assumption that a 10 and a 20-year pipe would handle double the water, and you've said that that may not necessarily be the case. So if we'll get that information too, please.
Sure.
Could I also ask with that if, I don't know whether this is possible, but if there were ways to do 2 separate lines off rather than one big one, if that actually makes a difference along the way. And I'm sure you're probably looking at opportunities. I know that. Member Martinez was trying to come up with another way to not go under Oxford with everything, but if there is something, would that make a difference? And then would 2 10-year pipes be just as adequate as 1 25-year?
That's an excellent point, and that's exactly what we want to look at. Is there the opportunity to do an alternate route, still maintain Oxford, but is there another way? And so we'll bring you some more of those details on August 5th to talk about that.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. So the pipe, where we're replacing it now for the sinkhole, it is going from either the same size pipe to a larger pipe, or, I mean, it's continually getting larger down to the river, right? We're not creating another bottleneck.
Correct.
Okay. Then the other thing, I just want to clarify where Jason is. It is Jason south of Quincy, and it dead ends right up at the bottom of Rotolo Park. It actually does feed down into West Radcliffe.
Okay.
Yeah, just a point of clarification, it's not the park, Jason Park.
No, it's not
So
Jason
I think
Park.
that is
Gotcha.
what, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank
Okay.
you. Thank you for the clarification.
Further questions? So in some ways, it's like step one is figuring out S1, get it as big as we can, and S2, and then how S3 has some things happening that might make it, like it doesn't matter what we do with S1 and S2, it's going to be bad for some part of S3. That's a next step. And then the other kinds of short wins of clearing out pipes and anything else.
Again, it would be up to council if you wanted to pursue the flood proofing, either sooner or later. And, that could potentially be a quick win, although there are high administrative issues and costs with that as
Yeah.
well.
To what extent, and I know that maybe Caliber was going to do some modeling, I don't know, when you put in 25-year pipes, or maybe 25 and then a 10 next to it with Oxford, what kind of relief does it give upstream that will alleviate some of that was what I heard last time, is that it will help. I mean, the Calibre guy said, yeah, it's going to have an impact. So that's why we need to do that. It's not just for the fact that it's disintegrating on Oxford, but really it's for the mitigation of flooding.
Yeah, so I
Can they
think.
model that out to say this is-
Absolutely.
okay.
So I think it's then, so how much will it help?
Right.
And will it help enough to relieve, I don't think it will relieve the need to do S3,
Right.
but will it provide some interim relief at all? And if so, will it even be noticeable, I guess? So we can have them definitely quantify that and give more specifics around that.
Thank you. Thank you. Member Sierra.
Is it okay if I jump to the loan aspect of the
Yeah, I think
presentation?
we have an expert here. We have the finance
Yeah, we can
folks. and
transition to Ms. Sobota now.
Let's
So
go with that.
I'll start with the loan question. So there's a $3 million loan transfer from the later fund to the stormwater detention fund. Are we allowed only one transfer within a certain time frame, or are we also able to do concurrently other transfers from other funds if needed? I'm just trying to get an understanding of how that all works, if there's any limitations.
Okay. So I will give a description. So the later fund is the long-term asset reserve fund, and it is part of the unassigned balance within the general fund. The other funds, we can do transfers from other funds. However, as Maria stated
Right.
earlier, even though there are balances there, we have needs that we believe will absorb those. So at this point, we believe as a staff that what we're bringing forward is only a part of the later funds. There's $5 million available, but because the discussion was around a $3 million transfer for the preparatory stages of looking at S1 and S2 design, plus in addition to that, a rate assessment study by a third party. We felt that that was the suggestion or the recommendation that we would ask to bring forth for you to vote on, perhaps at a later regular meeting.
Okay. And my question had nothing to do with actually knowing, what the maintenance and all for some of the other funds, it's more of a hypothetical in terms of
I don't think there'd be
what
a
was
problem.
possible, yeah. And then secondly, regarding the yield on the financing, is that a conservative yield, or is I know that we just did a refinancing just recently on, I can't remember which fund it was, but just trying to understand if that's conservative or if that's market rate at the moment, that it could potentially fluctuate, just understand that.
Yeah, what we did at the moment was do a market rate for an A-rated transaction, just to give you a sense of what this would look like. It was based on rates last week. So is it subject to market change, or like everything else that you're talking about here?
And can I make a clarification? So I think what you're referring to would be on what the bond would be, as far as an interest rate between, it would have to be an arm's length transaction from a loan from the general fund into the enterprise fund. And we could assign a very minimal interest rate. It would be something that we would assign, perhaps it could even be 1%. It just there needs to be an interest rate attached to it to make it an arm's length transaction. Okay. It wouldn't necessarily have to follow market, but it could.
Councilmember Berentine.
Are we able to get a list of the urban drainage current plans that we're doing with them or projects? Do we have any currently with them?
The only project that is in their pipeline for potential funding is the Dry Creek. We have requested funding for that project, and I believe we're scheduled out in 2023 for about $500,000.
Okay, so I've looked at a couple of the other communities surrounding because we all pay into the urban drainage fund, and so I was a little dismayed to find out that we really didn't have any projects that we've been using them to get into the pipeline, so to speak, of working on these. I had a little bit more information on how Littleton has been doing theirs over the last 10 years. And so I looked in the budget and I didn't see one. So if there's something that's supposedly coming up, is there some reason that you're aware of that we never started a project with them or to get into the program so that we could start using some of the funding that our community contributes to them?
Yeah, I really can't speak to why staff did not submit anything over the past several years.
Why do you think that we don't have any opportunity to do anything with this currently with them now?
They solicit projects every year. We're currently in that solicitation process, so we are planning to submit to them for immediate funding to try and get something. Typically, they don't do much beyond. I think $500,000 is at the top end.
Did
and
we
they
do that last year?
Pardon me?
Did we already do that last year when we had the flood? So
No.
when we had the flood last year, we didn't tap them for
No.
anything?
We were too early in the process, so we were about this time last year. We didn't really have a project per se at that time to really identify enough to put something meaningful in to submit to them.
But we do now.
We do.
All right,
you're
if
in
you
the
could bring
process.
this forward, I would appreciate it and the potential for some of the money. That'd be great.
Did I just hear you say that, but we are in the process for this next round now?
Correct,
Great.
yep.
Okay, thank you. Other questions on the financing? Member Cuesta.
What ties in with the financing, but this might cross back over to you, Director DeAndrea. So, and I'm going to pull the timelines up on the bonds. I think that they would be issued February or March of 2020. Does that sound correct? At least what was given to us in our packet. And again, I'm trying to hunt that down here.
So I can address that question?
Please.
So a small team of us gathered, and we put together a prospective timeline that is included in the packet, but then also in the memo that's attached that Stiefel prepared on our behalf for tonight's meeting. So the thought would be, based on your direction, moving ahead with an interfund loan in the fall, and also conducting the enterprise rate increase assessment that I had just discussed, looking at implementing a rate increase at the end of the year so that we can establish the foundation to move forward with bonding in the springtime period, because we do need to establish the rates in advance in order to be competitive in the marketplace to secure those bonds. So this was a preliminary timeline that was put forth, so you're correct.
And I do appreciate it. And then I believe that if we were to follow that timeline, bonds were issued spring of 2020, that the project would begin summer or fall of 2020, according to the same timeline?
That would be the hope. We don't think that the design will take all that long. What will take time is working with the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad to get a pipe underneath, and that really becomes if if you will, the long pole in the tent. And really, we're at their discretion as to how quickly we can get a license agreement for that pipe to go through.
Thank you. It may be too far out to estimate then. Is there even a ballpark on what a project like this would take then? If we were to begin and call it summer or fall of 2020?
Typically, you know, we want to get some more input and see what the timeline is. We could certainly do a project, let's say, west of, I think I mentioned that a couple weeks ago, starting west of 85 and working to the river. It's that piece under 85 between CDOT and BNSF. I don't anticipate CDOT being nearly as difficult, but really, you know, the process with BNSF could take up to a year and a half.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
And if I may, this is one of the reasons why we had suggested that we actually bond in tranches, because we have certain tax requirements as far as when we actually complete a project once we've received the funds. It's a 3-year time period before there are tax implications. So it wouldn't be an all or nothing right away. It would more than likely be bonds issued in certain increments based on the project completion timeframe that was put forth.
Keep
One
going.
more vote, just for my clarification then. So it would be a year and a half to completion, or just to be able to work an agreement out with BNSF?
Just to work out the agreement.
Then the project could start.
But from the river moving east, we can start.
Certainly.
And that's where
yeah.
you would start anyway, right?
Yes.
Usually anyway. You would
Usually
at the
start
end.
from the downstream and work
Yes,
your
and
way
then
up.
work
yeah.
your way up,
Mhm.
so. Member Barentine.
On the bond that happened in 2001, so they had this study in 1999, they did some work in 2001. They got, like, I think it's $1.6 million, and we still haven't paid that off. And that's concerning, because I think that they went from $6 to $16 in order to kind of cover that. And so the vast majority of the money that we collect every year, there's not a lot of maintenance being done. It goes to pay the principal and interest. So when I was looking at this with a couple of people, they go, how in the heck are we going to pay off $20 million when we couldn't pay off $1.6 million in 18 years? And so, especially when there was that much of an increase, I mean, it looked like there was a $10 increase that was supposed to go to pay that. So, and then it got refinanced, and I don't know whether people are monkeying around with premium bonds or doing whatever with that money, but just looking at the timeline of it, doesn't look like that's capable, and that's quite a heck of a jump to go from 6 to 16. So how are we working this?
So if I can address that, the amount was $1.325 million, and there was a term established as a relate. It wasn't a matter of us not being able to pay it back. We actually have other costs associated with the funds that were outlined in the spreadsheet that I sent to you. And the fund balance that is current at the beginning of 2018 of $1.1 million is used for maintenance and for the personnel required and needed to support the maintenance that we are doing, while albeit it's not enough, obviously, to maintain to the level that we have established we need. And then it does also cover the debt service. So, and you are correct, it's an annual amount since 2001 of $16.66 annually that is paid. It's not that we weren't able to cover the debt, it's just that we were not able to build reserves at the same time, do the maintenance and things of that matter. So I wanted to clarify that.
Okay.
And we have established in the memo that it would take a substantial increase in order to pay off these bonds, but we have a need, and unfortunately, that comes with a price tag.
No, I understand that. We had a need before in 2001, and they did some work, and and I think a significant changes from 6 to 16, and we still owe that $1.6 million. We have not done, the normal budget was $100,000 for some kind of maintenance through the vast majority of this 18 years. We didn't do it. There was a little bit of money spent for the 1.2 or 1.6 in 2001, then some money spent in 2009, and then on the capital outlay budget portion of it, which I asked before for clarification, it like budgets, and then it says 0 for the actual on the ones that I've been able to go back through, and that was 2009. So I just want some additional information on that. What I was saying, aside from that, is that the vast majority of the amount of revenue that we take in each year then seems to go to pay off the debt. So it looked to me like we were taking in anywhere between $300,000 and $500,000 in revenue, and that a big chunk of that was going to pay this debt off that seems to never go away.
Okay, if I can refer
do.
to the spreadsheet that was included in the packet, and I want to make sure I touch on each point. So you had mentioned the
Point of
capital
information,
expenses.
can you provide the page? Thank you.
So I think your first question related to the capital expenditures. The 2001 under capital expenses does show 1.3 million related to the bond issuance, and you can see the project and projects that were identified over the capital spending. So there was capital spending in 2001, 2002, 2003 related to the projects, and then going forward into also 2009, which is a date that you had mentioned as well. The revenue, the corresponding revenue, so since 2001, you can see in the boxed area the amount of revenue that not only helps support the capital projects, but also the maintenance and the debt service. And you can see the debt service amount is not equal to the revenue that we bring in. It's less than half.
Oh, I didn't think it was
Oh, okay, I thought it.
half.
Oh, I'm sorry, I
Half
thought
of
that's what I
the amount of money
heard.
that we collect every year goes to pay the debt, and it's
On
not- and-
projects that were completed.
but for actually some very few projects got done in the grand scheme of things. All I'm saying is that we end up then being behind the 8 ball and mortgaging off the future of being able to maintain the system and put in normal capital projects, because we're taking all our revenue that we're collecting, a majority of it, to pay off the debt, and then we're not able to keep up with it, including what maintenance has been in here. This is very difficult for me to respond from, because it's extremely tiny, but I have gone through on the system and looked at the budget itself, and that's all I'm asking. So for our bond guy, if we're gonna, I'm just asking, if we're gonna do $20 million, and we still haven't, I mean, how are we going to debt into the future and cause a problem into the future, because these pipes that we're putting in today, even if we fix the system today, are not going to last 30, 40, 50 years. They're going to eventually fail and need to be done too. So the ongoing maintenance that this fund should be providing some system for, that doesn't seem to be what it's been used for. And how are we going to avoid that problem as we're looking at both the money to pay the bond and make sure we have funds to maintain a system going into the future, so we don't create this problem all over again? I think that's reasonable.
Oh, I absolutely think that's reasonable, and I think when we spoke the last time when I came, I had said that part of the reason that we have the issue we have is that our fees were so low that we did not build the capital reserve necessary to address the problem, nor were we addressing the capital maintenance needs of the current system. So when we're going forward and we're looking at bonding, remember, bonding is going to pay for the projects that we're going to decide as a city, or you are all going to decide as a city to move forward with. When we do the rate assessment, part of that rate assessment that I talked about, the third-party rate assessment, will also include a study as to what is needed to maintain the system that we're going to bond for. So we will understand more about what those fees need to be in order to do both.
And that's actually my original question. So originally when they did it, they thought moving from 6 to 16 would go ahead and pay, and I assume maybe maintain the system, but that's not what happened. And so, and that seems a pretty significant jump for me. So if we're going to go at this and understand that we want to make sure that we're taking into account the amount of money to not just keep creating this cycle, then I would appreciate that. That seems a significant jump for me from 6 to 16. Maybe the 6 was so pitifully low before that was not even a question. But I just want that assessment done as we move forward, and I appreciate you getting to the bottom of my question.
Thank you. I'm going to let you continue to answer anything there. I did want to ask one quick question, though. The 680 is 1993, is that correct, the annual?
I need to look. Yes, so.
And then 20,
yes.
20 years later, it's $16, so we're,
Correct.
right, okay, thanks. Let's go on with, I think Member Martinez was next, and then Member Sierra.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we haven't been charging the fees to keep up with our needs, and that's just compounded over a long amount of time, and so we need to just make sure that in the future, we don't do that, and we have to raise rates probably accordingly. We have a lot of catching up to do. It's just a fact. It's gonna cost money, and it's gonna, we need to avoid having this in the future, and it's up to us. We just, you know, need to build that into our plan and our fee schedules to increase them regularly over time to make sure we have enough to maintain. So we don't have as much of a trouble with this as we need to. I think we're all on the same page there. And the bonding in the segments makes sense to me because these projects take a long time. And I think, was it last study session you said something about a 3-year duration? Is that about right?
And I think I can ask David to clarify this, but my understanding is that the 85% of a project needs to be completed within, or a group of projects that are supported by a bond need to be completed within a 3-year window. Otherwise, tax implications start to occur.
Yeah, that's correct. Bond council will ask the city at the time that we close on the financing to have a reasonable expectation that you're going to spend 85% of the money that you borrow within a 3-year period of time. It's not a magic bullet that says you actually have to have it done, but that's the reasonable expectation test. And I think one of the reasons why we've talked about doing this in segments, particularly with the railroad, you know, you have to sort of, and frankly, the rate increases that you're going to have to implement, I think, would suggest that we do this in pieces.
And I think that makes a lot of sense, especially because we know these projects take a long time and we need to plan for the future. It's not like a one-year thing, you know, obviously we all are on the same page with that too. So from my perspective, I'm kind of thinking of it in terms of, yes, it's gonna take a lot of money, it's gonna take a lot of time, but should we segment it out in a different way in like what projects will positively impact the greatest number of people in the quickest amount of time? Is that another way that we could look at building the projects out and maybe do the first ones that will impact the most people in the first 3 years, the second, you know, in the next 3 years? And I'm just wondering if that's another way to look at it. Don't need an answer. It was more of like a statement. Just kind of like.
That will take some analysis,
Yeah, for sure. But that's just, I was thinking because, you know, we all want change right now. That's just not realistic. But what projects are going to impact the most people the soonest is kind of what I'm thinking we could start with.
Great. Councilmember Sierra.
I believe you answered a lot of the questions I had about that last chart on the fees collected. I think you went through the personnel, the contractual. I guess regarding the debt service, do we happen to know, I could be a council request if you don't have the number in front of you, but what the principal has left over on that piece?
I believe when I looked today, it was just over 300,000.
Okay. And then, so that was the principal. Then I had a question for Maria Director DeAndre. At the beginning of this presentation, I think you stated that you were also going to be looking at the maintenance, or at least potential fee structure across different fronts as well. So you did say the water, storm drainage, and sewer.
Sanitary sewer,
Okay.
correct.
So you are looking at whether or not, or trying to prevent something similar happening with those as well. So we can expect to see that in the near future as well.
Yes, so and just to reiterate, the piece that we're undertaking right now, and to Councilwoman Barentine's point, is that we're doing a condition assessment of all 3 systems: sanitary sewer, water, and storm sewer. So this study has focused on the flood-prone areas. We also know on a given street that there might be storm sewer out there already. What condition is that in, and how do we go about maintaining that? So we have to work that back into the fees as well to maintain that existing system that probably is sized correctly, works okay, but we still haven't done the maintenance that we need to, so we need to work that back into the rates. And so we'll do something similar for the for the sanitary sewer and the water mains out in the streets.
Great. Are you finished? Go ahead.
Just a follow-up on
Go
that. Do we
ahead.
happen to have a time frame?
Yeah, as I mentioned, the RFP is going out. We will probably come back to you with a recommendation to award, I believe, late September, that second meeting in September. And then we should have that wrapped up by March of next year.
I think Mayor Pro Tem was next, and then Member Cuesta.
Thank you. So last year, when we were talking about the budget, so it was probably just about this time last year, the South Platte Water Renewal Partners talked about a rate study, and I believe that was talked about in here also. So the rate increases that we were talking about in this packet for the storm sewer system, for the $20 or $40 million, do not take into account any of the other rate increases that we are looking at that we're going to need. Is that correct?
That's correct. There's a cost of service study going on at South Platte right now, and that will be additional information that will be provided to council.
And will that be available on Thursday at the study session? Do you know that?
No, I don't believe so. They're just in the process of doing that. So the results aren't completed yet.
Okay, so I mean, we're looking at a pretty significant change just with the stormwater piece. And we already raised rates 7%, but we knew that we were going to need more. And that is very concerning to me. I mean, some of us think that we can just go out there and it doesn't matter, just you taxpayers open up your pocketbook. I am very concerned. I've been concerned for a long time. And I think that staff need to look at budget cuts because this is going to be huge, just the stormwater piece alone. But I'm telling you, because of the biogas and the other things we've done, it's going to cost us a lot of money. So I just want us to be aware of that. Thank you.
Councilmember Cuesta, I'll ask you a question later.
Thank you, Mayor. Going back to what you guys had just discussed on the bonds regarding portioning them out. So for instance, going back to S1, and S1 is the segment that appears to go under 85, therefore we'd have the BNSF negotiation we'd have to go through. But we could start work on the west side of Santa Fe. So that project S1, let me just get back up to the top on those financial implications. Shoot. So the S1 portion is 19 without detention and 16 with detention. So even that, we could portion out a segment. Could we do 5, 5, 9? Or do you need to take all of one segment's cost out at once? And excuse me, when I say 5, 5, 9, 5 million, 5 million, 9 million to get to that total.
I guess I'll ask you.
So without knowing exactly what 5, 5, and 9 builds,
Sure.
I wouldn't think that we could have a contract to build a third of a pipeline, perhaps, if you were going to have and I don't know S1 from S2, but if you're going to build a continuous pipeline, you might need to have a contract, and in order to have a contract to construct that, you'd need to have all the money in the bank to sign it. But if it was only a contract to build $5 million of a segment, maybe that's okay.
And the reason I asked that with the estimated timeline you described, it seems like we could easily go over 3 years from start to finish on that one. If we've got just a year and a half, couple years to go back and forth with BNSF. And then it sounds like if we hit that 3-year mark and we haven't spent 85% of, call it, we pulled out the total 19 million, the tax implication would kick in that you mentioned. And I was hoping you could give some more information on that. What happens with the taxes at that point?
So
What is that
essentially what
implication?
you've done is that you're borrowing at a tax exempt rate, and let's just make up a number and says it's at 3%, and you can put money in the bank over that 3-year period of time while you're spending in excess of 3%, so you're earning positive arbitrage, right? Once we get to the 3-year period, bond counsel will limit the amount of money that you can make on the remaining funds. The IRS likes to give you the benefit of borrowing at below market interest rates because they're tax exempt, but they have rules that govern what you can do, right? You just can't forever put money in the bank and earn interest over what you're borrowing. And so there'll be limitations upon what happens if you haven't met that 3-year threshold on the reinvestment of the proceeds. And again, it's a reasonable expectation test, but the service says to you that when we get to the end of 3 years, their enforcement is restricting the yield that you can earn on remaining funds.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Barentine.
Since you brought up the sewer, and we had the recent constituents coming about their sewer bills in different districts, sanitation districts coming in, I assumed for quite a few years the amount of money that Littleton had, because they had such a substantial reserve, I think 27 million at one time. I think it might be around 20 or 17 now. I just assumed it was because they were charging their people a whole lot more. In this process of going through the South Englewood Sanitation District and some of the billing that I saw, that I think it was Vicki Hoffman had presented, I realized they're not being charged more. They're not being charged significantly more. And so how in God's name they acquired that kind of money is an interesting, is something I would like to understand how that process worked. I would also like to know, because we are charging more and why we don't have that reserve is somewhat of a question to me. Also, if any money has been borrowed from that enterprise fund, similar to what we're doing for the stormwater, and maybe didn't get paid back or something, I don't know. But it seems kind of just odd that we would be charging more and not be able to have that kind of reserve in a partnership kind of endeavor like that. So it may just be an anomaly, but if you could answer that, bring that up as part of the process, I would appreciate it.
To that point, my understanding is that they charge quite a bit for tap fees, but perhaps you can look at that, because I think they're charging way beyond what we have. Maybe we aren't doing anything almost at all in that area. And they really have amassed a lot, and I do think it's a concern on their part because we're partners and we're not equal when we don't have the same backup for it. So things were not carefully thought through before you came on this end of it. Further questions about the finances for this? So I think, what do you need more from us? I think it sounds like we want you to keep moving forward. We're looking at this 25-year pipe versus a 10-year in different segments. I'm good.
I think I would like to ask if your expectation is that we would bring forth an ordinance at the next regular meeting to move forward with a $3 million transfer from the LTAR.
I would like to see us do that. Anybody in objection to that? Member or Mayor Pro Tem?
I do have a question about part of that, because I've noticed in the packet that there is extra work that Caliber has done, and we haven't paid them for that. It's work that's already been completed. Council voted no to move forward on that before, and so I want to know, has that money already been spent, even though we said no?
Could we stay with one thing at a time?
It applies to that $3 million, because that $3 million is going to be used to pay Caliber. Part of it is going to be used to pay Caliber.
Okay.
So the additional work that they did, we never brought the change order forward to council. We had talked about it at a study session. We never brought it forward. They were under the misunderstanding that it had been brought forward. That was one thing. But they've also attended additional meetings and done additional work in response to questions from council. So that's what we'll be seeking part of the change order for, is that additional work and the questions that came up at the meetings.
Thank you.
Are you interested in a $3 million transfer coming before us at the regular meeting?
I am not certain yet. I would like to talk more about it.
All right. Councilmember Wink. You asked if people were against. Okay, great. Councilmember Berentine.
It was my understanding that you said we have to have a project in order to do the money. So if we're bringing forward the $3 million, does that mean that we're setting what the $3 million is for? Do we have to do that at the same time?
In the memo, we outlined the specific things that the $3 million will be used for. It's not related to the bond issuance. I mean, it will help us get information to prepare for a bond issuance, and that decision would be made at a later time.
Okay, but that would include what? No, go ahead.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
No,
I'm thinking in my mind about things that I want to make sure that I tell you, even if you don't ask the question. If I may, I don't want to interrupt you, though.
No, go ahead.
Okay.
It's all fine.
I was going to say, even though we would come forth with a request to move forward with a potential loan, we would not necessarily use all that money, nor would we draw on those funds immediately. It would be dependent upon what the costs are that we're moving forward. For example, if we do a third-party assessment, which is one of the things for a rate study, if it exceeds our procurement threshold, we would come forth with a request to actually spend that money going forward with the assessment. So you will be aware how we are spending that money, and it would be done based on draws. It wouldn't be an automatic $3 million that is put into the enterprise fund. So I apologize for interrupting. I wanted to explain a little bit more about the context of that loan.
No, I appreciate the additional information. So in what you brought forward for the $3 million, there were questions in that on how we wanted to proceed. So if we're going to bring forward an ordinance, what ordinance are you bringing forward? Size of pipe, the work you're doing? Because you had questions about that. What exactly would you be bringing forward in order to do that, or we would hash that out on the dais depending on what ordinance you brought forward? That's what I'm asking.
The ordinance would not specifically state the projects, how we would move forward, because it's my understanding, based on the conversation tonight, there's still information related to how we want to move forward with S1, S2, or some combination, or S3.
Correct, and I guess
so
that's where I'm having a problem, is that I don't want to go from specific in a study session to vague with money when we bring an ordinance forward. That's all I'm trying to find out.
I guess what we would be asking for is an ability to transfer those funds, but as I had mentioned, we would come forth with requests to secure a draw on that loan to move forward. So it's my understanding the ordinance will be giving us the opportunity to draft the language that's necessary to support that, and the specific projects that are spent would still come forward to council. So it's at your pleasure.
It sounds like we have at least 5 of us that want to move it forward to a regular meeting and have a conversation there. Councilmember Cuesta?
We need to keep the conversation moving forward, absolutely. But even in the course of this, hour and 15 minutes, hour and a half, we've been discussing this. I am now going back to the presentation from 7-8 a couple weeks ago, where we do have our price chart, essentially the cost summary table is what it's called. And we're looking at 40 million, give or take, to complete sections or segments 1 and 2.
Just for a point of information, you're talking about option A, right? That's the 40 million done? It isn't? Which one are you talking about?
You bet. So I'm just looking at the financial summary on page.
Thank you. I got it. Keep going.
You bet. So in the course of this, so in tonight's packet, we have S1 and S2 without detention, 40.1 million. With detention, 40.6. Going back to the cost table from 2 weeks ago, we can do everything at the 10-year capacity for 37 with no detention, or for 40 with detention. And then this brings to me, how critical is that 10 versus 20? If we can, with one $40 million shot, fix everything at that 10-year level, as opposed to fixing 2 pieces for $40 million at the 25-year level. So this is just one of the things, I'm going to be doing as much research as I can over the next couple weeks as well. And I should go ahead and raise my hand. I've certainly had some contact with Calibre with follow-up questions, so I've played a role in additional questions to them as well. And so I guess the question to you, Director DeAndrea, and it might not make a difference at this point if we've got the 5 votes, but the summary for the $3 million is completing initial and final design of Oxford Avenue outlet pipe for projects S1 and S2. So it does seem to say here that this, moving forward, the $3 million would be dedicated to S1 and S2. Would we have the flexibility if we did decide to expand that or go a different route?
Yes, those 5 bullets on page 2 of your report is essentially what we're looking for that, what we would spend that $3 million on. What we don't know right now is how much that might cost. So to Ms. Sobota's point, we would come back to you, we would put out a request for proposal. We know it's going to be over $100,000, but we're going to use and draw down from that $3 million based on those proposals how much that first bullet might cost. Similarly, the second bullet, completing a stormwater system condition assessment. We've got that out right now for an RFP. We're not 100% sure yet until we get the proposals how much that might cost, but it would go against that $3 million. So those are those 5 items that we would use that money for, coming back to you with the actual costs.
Thank you. Let's move ahead on it. I want to get ourselves positioned to move, just keep moving. We've got enough information to get it going so that we can do what we need to do. It's going to take a while to get it set up, though. So in the meantime, we can figure out which of these projects, which segments we're going to do, but at least we'll be positioned to start on one of them with the first chunk, right? So I'm ready to move us forward. Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question too. I am a little bit concerned. I had been in conversations with another constituent today that had been flooded and made some improvements to his house to protect from flooding. And I didn't understand everything that he's done, but they are hurting financially, and we're hoping that the city, now I'm not talking about floodproofing because I asked him specifically, I don't believe he's had done any of the floodproofing measures that we had talked about, but I think he hired somebody to tell him what he ought to do. The other thing in the packet this week that we've taken off the table is buyback of properties. And I am wondering, properties where there is endangering life, and I don't know, Nathan Fogg may, I read something in one of the emergency operations plans a few months ago that when there are people's lives in danger, that the municipality or the county or whatever will buy back properties, and I don't think that we should discount that. So I think
Do you have a suggestion for how would we take that on after this next leg of funding? We need to get some funding for that. So I think in the long run, I agree with you, there may be a lot of other things we need to look at, but we can't just decide we're going to look at it and then come back here and say we're not going to spend any funding or we're not going to bring anything forward. So I think we need to look at all options for funding. We're going to do bonding against the rate changes, but we're going to have to look at a number of other things, unfortunately. And I have some news about the county and what they're doing next too, so this is adding up.
Right.
It's not easy.
all right.
And none of us are saying, open your pocketbooks, we're going to take, it hits all of us. So I just agree with you that this is really adding up for people.
All right.
And it hurts them.
Thank you.
Member Cuesta, did you have another one? No, okay. Okay, so you have enough direction to go forward on the next. And it sounds like, we're going to be coming back and talking about further, S1, S2, and then beyond other things as well. So this doesn't end it tonight. I don't want it to sound to citizens that this is it. We're not. Unfortunately, we've got a lot to figure out still. Both directors, I want to thank you for the work that you've put into this. This has been a really hard place to come into for your jobs and just sort of jump in when we've had some of the most difficult things happen, and you have to answer for people in the past that, it's hard to figure out what happened. Obviously, in 1999, things happened. In 2001, 2002, they did do some things, but not everything. And I don't want to be in that position, just like Member Questa, thinking 20 years down the line, what's your legacy? Well, we didn't go the big route because we couldn't afford it, but then somebody else is going to have to pay for it even at a higher level. So I just appreciate the work that you've been putting into this and the way that you've handled yourself with all kinds of difficult and challenging times where people are angry, and rightfully so, and hurt. So thank you for being so professional in the process. All right, that's it for that item. Next is council members' choice. Member Sierra, or Member Martinez was going to push her. Do you want to start?
I can start if I can remember what my question is. I wrote it down. But I guess it's more of a council request.
Go ahead. I was going to ask them another question, but I'll bring it to them later.
Okay. So just a council request, and it was brought up during the Code Enforcement Advisory Committee meeting. And I know we've talked about it in these meetings as well in terms of using the utility bill for added communication. Can I get a little bit of, yep, I'm not speaking into it. Can I get a little bit of information on, what's possible? Are we able to add any type of communication to utility bills, whether it's for court enforcement or if it's for just anything that we want to just alert the public on? Just a little bit of information on what we can do with utility bills. That is all.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Barentine. Mayor Pro Tem.
I actually have something that was a little concerning to me. I mean, I knew that the fees had gone up for the block party, but I went in to pick up an application for our block party on our block. And not only is there a $25 fee increase, you also have to go around and get signatures from all the neighbors and turn in signatures to the Public Works Department, and you have to have 100% participation, or you cannot
Point of
close off the
information, are you
street.
talking about National Night Out? Is that what you're talking
Well,
about?
yes, during
Okay, I just
that,
wanna make sure I
right,
understood what you're talking
right,
about.
right,
You're talking about the block party.
right,
not
block party. Well,
Downtown block party.
no, I'm talking about individual
National
block
night out.
parties, National
She is
Night Out,
talking about
right.
National Night Out.
Okay, but whether you do it during, National Night Out or whenever. So the signatures and personal handwritten signatures with addresses. And then the other thing is you have to rent barricades from a barricade company, and you have to bring the receipts from the rental company in order to have a block party. You cannot block off the street any other way. We are making it incredibly difficult for people in this city to get together with their neighbors. And so I'm very troubled about that.
All right.
No report.
Member Quest. Member Quest.
I don't know that I need a council request because it's a fact. I have the application, and so I think perhaps this council ought to do something, but
Okay, Councilmember Questa.
I have nothing this evening. Thank you.
Member Martinez.
Thank you. I have also heard similar frustrations regarding the block party and the process. So I have a council request in terms of just what the new process is and why there was a change.
Thank you. I also have someone who's requested it, and I would like to see if there's a way we could do a bypass of it this year until we get this. I mean, council never knew about it, and this is one of the things that we do with our constituents all the time, and I just talked another neighbor into doing one. She hasn't even come in to find out yet what it is. I imagine that it does have a cost to it, and it would be nice if we as a council talked about that and made sure that we knew what was happening so that we can explain at least to people or find another way of doing funding. We have $20,000 that we did not approve for nonprofits that are caring for people in our community, and it's still just sitting there in the city council's account. Maybe we say we'll draw, oh, it's not? It wasn't budgeted? I thought we left it there. No, okay. So we don't have that. All right, so I'm wondering in the council request if you could consider some other kind of options for funding for those who might, or if you want to address it now, that's fine too.
I will just say that I think the whole process of special events and including, neighborhood block parties is not crystal clear throughout the city. And I have talked to the directors about it and recognized it as an issue. I'm happy to put together sort of what we do, but I've asked the directors and I want to take a lead on that to say, are we working in the best interest of the citizens for everyone's safety? Can we document costs and that sort of thing? So that's definitely underway. If we have an immediate, moratorium, we're not going to change anything, that would be a council decision. But I think there certainly room for improvement there, but we're working on that. Just wanted to let
Can I
you
just
know.
ask for a clarification? One person told me that actually, if they just had one barricade, they would probably get that, but if they needed to get more, they had to pay for it. Are there a certain number, or is everybody paying for it?
You would have to pay to block off the street in terms of safety for that.
Okay.
So I don't
it's
think
not-
unless you're in a cul-de-sac, I don't think that would work.
Okay, so that was probably misinformation. Okay. Member Berentine?
Get a clarification on that, because that's that increase happened with the council voting on the fee schedule. Correct? I mean, Scott from over there on Washington brought that whole issue up, that I don't believe that they were being charged anything before, and now they are. And if we start adding in the cost of the police showing up, or the fire showing up, or the safety services coming to somebody's block party, I don't know if we can just go ahead and waive that. I mean, we'd have to look at the process, since that's part of that fee schedule. So if we could get that information, that'd be great. But I think it would need a vote of the council to, waive that for this year if that's what we decided to do. But
I'll
we need some
investigate that.
process.
Thank you for that.
Thanks.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Actually, I don't have an objection to the $25 fee. It's all the other things that add on to that. And
So it's not an increase of another 25, it's 25 flat.
it's 25 flat for the permit fee, but then to have to get barricades and get signatures and all of that, I think that takes a lot of energy that nobody has.
I had not heard about the 100% participation in signatures either. That is going to be a blow for the neighbor I just talked into doing this. All right, you're going to get us enough information, but we don't have any time. We're not meeting next Monday to be of help to this, and I think July 30th is the deadline for sign. No, it's this week. Isn't it 26th is the deadline for, I think, yeah. If we can get enough information to decide something if we need to, but maybe it's in retrospect, I don't know. That'd be helpful. Maybe the numbers of how many have signed up at this point, because if it's deterring people from signing up, we wouldn't want that either. And the reason why I'm asking about block party versus National Night Out is that some neighborhoods have block parties repetitively throughout the year, but this is specifically National Night Out that you're talking about, which is a little bit different. I thought it was a coordinated effort amongst our city to really get everybody out to do this. Yeah. Thank you. You were finished, Member Martinez? Okay. I do have a few things. Tuesday, I met with the Englewood Chamber in the morning for their board meeting. They're doing really well, still doing some strategic planning and very much wanting to speak into some of the issues that we bring up from time to time around business. So I think they're getting organized around that. On Wednesday, I had Dr. Cog, and it was the public hearing. That is the second to the last stage of our getting the 3 financial grants that we're getting. And the feedback on ours were fairly positive, although there was only one person per project. But still, somebody gave feedback, not publicly at the meeting, but had written in, emailed. And then Friday, we had the Arapahoe County Commissioners, Mayors, Managers. This group, I don't know if you realize, sometimes I report on it, every other month, the county commissioners, the managers, and the mayors meet and talk about a number of different things. We hosted it here this last time, and we had an update on the jail, and I was misled or misunderstood that the jail bond issue is going to go on the ballot this fall, not next year. And they are hoping that we're all going to take a little tour over there and get informed on it because they want us all to support it. I think we need to really think about this and give our reactions to it. So I don't know what it should be, but I do think it will play in at least another monthly amount of money that is going to be charged to our folks. So go get a tour of it, see what you think, how you think we should weigh in as a city. I do think it will be important. Some of you have been contacted by commissioners. Have any of, I know Councilmember Martinez had been. Have others been? Yeah, okay, yeah. So just know that that's what's on, I think that's what's on the
Could I ask
conversation
for
table.
clarification? I've already attended like a couple of seminars on this. Are they still talking about the whole 10-year program and the $600 million to do this for?
Oh, they're talking about
both of-
$980 million, close to $1 billion.
Okay, and that's for the district attorney's office, for the jail, and
The
for
whole
the,
Justice Center
for
area.
the whole
Mhm.
justice, okay.
Yep. It is a chunk of change. Then on Friday, the Metro Mayors has a subcommittee that I'm on with Housing and Hunger and Homelessness meeting. We are continuing to hear about some of the things available to the state, and a couple of folks there are going to be helping with the Tri-City next steps. One of the questions came up about the housing authority, whether or not giving preference to people who either work in Englewood with Section 8, or whether or not we, or people who have lived in Englewood and now are under sort of a pressure, whether that ought to be something we think about. So maybe we can talk with the housing authority folks about whether that would work or not. I don't know. That's how Sheridan is looking at it. I think Littleton is as well, but I'll bring you more on that in the future. Then this week, on Thursday, what's happening? 7:30, South Platte. Is anybody not coming that we need to know? Everybody's coming. Great. We will see you all on Thursday then. And the National Night Out, I do have two council requests. One would be the railroad and I meant to ask them before they left, but the railroad, when we have to go to bat on figuring out underneath the railroad, I would imagine that some other folks that represent us would be helpful in that. And so if we want to alert DeGette's office to that, or others, Froelich and the state, and we might want to start letting them know now so that they will begin to help us with this if we're going to have to go underneath. And then the second thing is, could we get some information on the repairs that have been done on Oxford? And I keep hearing people saying they keep repairing the same thing over and over, but I know that that's not true in all areas. Some of it's just segments that disintegrate, and then there's a next segment and another segment. So it would be helpful to know where has it been where it's actually over and over the exact same repair versus when have we actually been replacing and it's continuing. I think both are going on, but it's in different areas. So if we could get a little bit of report on that, I think that would be helpful to explain to people. Even when we were out looking at Oxford, they thought it was the exact same area, but we knew, no, it's actually right next to it, and it's continuing to go. All right, that's it for me. City manager's choice. City attorney. No report. Thank you. This meeting is adjourned. Let the record show that we're 10 minutes early.